That looks valuable. You can never have too much treasure. You can never have too much treasure. I've attained the awesome.
I was manufactured.
Pillage! Kill them all! Brace yourselves! Kill them all! Brace yourselves! Kill them all!
I was manufactured.
Pillage! Not enough. Kill them all! Not enough.
Talking circles. You talking circles on my bedroom floor, tracing old fights on the club. closet door. Say we're fine, put your keys in your hand. Tell a different plan. If you're gonna say my name,
Brace yourself!
don't look away.
March on!
If you're gonna cut
Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got a couple quick things. First, if you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. The YouTube algorithm loves that stuff and pushes my videos to new viewers. Secondly, I just launched the Void of Fears podcast on Spotify. Same stories, ad-free, and you can listen with your screen off. Links in the description. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to support the channel. It means the world to me and helps keep it growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The graveyard wasn't for the dead. It was a quarantine zone. I understand that now. I didn't understand it when we arrived. None of us did. And I think that's the only reason I'm still here to tell you this. Because ignorance bought me a few extra days. Just enough time to record everything. Just enough time for someone to hear what happened to us before I lose whatever clarity I have left and become something that doesn't feel the need to explain itself anymore. My name is Tarsis Vale. I was the mission archivist and documentary lead on the Araveth, the first crewed vessel in human history to cross the intergalactic void and reach the Andromeda Galaxy, 2.5 million light years from Earth. The mission was called Project Far Shore, and it took 6 years of engineering, 4 years of crew selection, and one too many press conferences where politicians shook hands in front of cameras and called it the greatest achievement in human history. They said it with such confidence, those smiling people in their clean rooms, and the thing is, they weren't wrong. It genuinely was the greatest achievement in human history. It was also, as it turns out, the worst mistake we ever made. I'm going to tell you everything. Not because I think knowing will save you. I'm long past believing there's a version of this where knowing saves anyone. But I spent my entire career believing that history only matters if someone witnesses it. And I am not willing to stop believing that now, at the end, when it matters most. So, here I am, sitting in a room with the curtains drawn, 3 cameras running, recording this, because that is what I do. That is what I've always done. I record things, I witness them, I make sure they exist in some permanent form that outlasts the moment. If something happens to me after I finish this, at least the record will remain. Start at the beginning, Tarsis. Okay, the Andromeda Galaxy has been visible to human eyes for as long as human eyes have existed. On a clear night, far from city lights, you can look up at the constellation Andromeda and find it. A soft, pale smear of light, like a thumbprint pressed into the dark. The Persian astronomer Abd al-Rahman al-Sufi wrote about it in the 10th century, calling it a small cloud. The German astronomer Simon Marius described it in the early 1600s as resembling the light of a candle seen through a horn. For a very long time, people thought it was simply a cloud of gas inside our own Milky Way. It wasn't until Edwin Hubble, in 1925, using a telescope on Mount Wilson in California, resolved individual stars inside it, and proved conclusively that what we were looking at was not a cloud but an entire separate galaxy, an island universe, as one philosopher had guessed 2 centuries before, that humanity began to understand the true scale of what it had been staring at all along. Andromeda, catalogued as Messier 31, is the largest galaxy in what astronomers call the Local Group, the cluster of roughly 50 galaxies that includes our own Milky Way. It is approximately 10 billion years old. It spans 260,000 light years from one edge to the other. It contains somewhere around 1 trillion stars, roughly 4 times the number of stars in the Milky Way. And it is moving toward us. Right now, as you listen to this, Andromeda is closing the distance between itself and Earth at about 68 miles per second, dragged toward us by gravity that neither galaxy can resist. In 4 billion years, give or take, the 2 galaxies will collide and merge into something astronomers have nicknamed Milkdromeda. The stars are so sparsely distributed that most of them won't physically crash into each other. They'll just be reorganized, shuffled into new orbits by the gravitational violence.
Direction
Two
indicated.
stars passing
Should
through
have
each other.
trained more.
The sun will survive. Earth, if it still exists,
Assistance
will
needed.
survive. But the sky will look very different.
Alert. Threat
I used to
incoming.
find that beautiful.
Alert.
The
Threat
idea of
incoming.
two great structures falling toward each other across unimaginable distances. Inevitable, patient,
Task failed.
indifferent to anything living, and the small rocks in between. I don't find it beautiful anymore. What humanity understood about Andromeda, what every model and projection and hopeful calculation pointed to, was that a galaxy that old, that large, that rich in stars, orbited by dozens of satellite galaxies, should be absolutely filled with life. That was the mathematical expectation. That was the premise that Project Farshaw was built on. The Fermi paradox, the unsettling question of why, given how many stars and planets and billions of years exist in this universe we had never heard from anyone, had a comfortable answer for most scientists, which was that the universe was simply very big,
Your
and
assistant
signals
is
travel
required.
at the speed of light. We'd only been listening for 100 years. Find another galaxy. Look up close. Silence
Unit
will
10.
be
Protect request.
The propulsion system
Task
our
failed.
vehicles was the culmination of 2 generations of engineering. The gravity fold drive that I'm not technically qualified to explain in detail, but which functioned, in practical terms, by compressing the space in front of the ship and expanding the space behind it, so that the vessel was not so much travelling through the distance as relocating itself within it. The crew spent most of those 11 weeks in deep sleep rotation, suspended
strange new
in
friends.
biological state. Mission documents described as
You
dreamless.
arms, legs.
Mine wasn't dreamless. I want to be
Like the
clear
little
about
one
that
from earlier.
because I think
Looks
it
much too
matters.
serious.
I had
I
the
was
same
happy to
dream
see him go.
for 11 weeks.
Stay.
And I didn't tell anyone
It's a
about
big
it.
game.
And I think that
Let's
was a mistake.
entertain one another.
In the dream, I was standing in a corridor of some kind.
Brace yourself.
Very long, high walls
March on.
inside, no ceiling visible. Just dark
Shake it off.
walls that curved gently as if I were inside something circular.
Incoming.
And the walls had writing.
Adrenaline
Not
rising.
writing I could read. Any alphabet I recognized.
Brace yourself.
Intricate markings carved into the stone. The depth suggested whoever made them had wanted very badly for the message to last.
You won't believe your eyes. Truly.
Reading things I couldn't understand. At the far end, there was always a door standing open. Through the door, there was nothing. Not darkness. Nothing.
Back. Brace
The
yourself.
absence of space itself. The
Ready.
gap where the universe simply
March
wasn't.
on. We shall
And every
Shake
single
it
night,
off.
something on the other side of that door turned and looked at me. I woke up from it 11 times in 11 weeks and didn't say a word to anyone. So what do you say?
Incoming.
6 people crossing 2.5 light years in a ship the
Let's
size
make it
of a
more
large
exciting.
house. I didn't want to be the one who made it feel smaller. There were 6 of us in that plane. Rwanda Valo Them was the first person I saw out of suspension. On approach day, standing in the
Ready
back
for anything.
his back to me, watching me from the water. Valor was the commander
You
of
dropped
sciences.
it. Let's give it another try.
He'd spent 12 years as a deep space rescue officer before being selected for this mission. Never been seen out there, between the stars.
That's the stuff.
Vessels that had gone down the computer system.
Ready.
He never talked about what he felt inside. Compressed it into something very dense, very still.
Brace yourself.
Measured sentences, emergencies. Prosthetic left eye, polished obsidian black, that he'd received after an accident that he never fully explained, and it caught the light strangely, giving him an
Adrenaline
asymmetric
full.
quality. One eye revealing the human, the other simply reflective. The implant had documented sensitivity to cameras and frequencies. It flickered the sources of other categories, where consciously those shivers from the magnetic interference. He disclosed this in his medical file. He'd also disclosed recurring nightmares in his psychological evaluation. Dreams about a dark place between stars with something waiting in it. He'd had them since he was a child. The evaluating psychologist noted them as clinically unremarkable, common enough.
You've come back! Tremendous! Let's play another game.
Dreams about the dark. Nobody flagged it as it, including me. I read that file 3 times.
Brace yourselves.
And the reverse was in the archive bay.
You'll be doing that one for days.
Already awake, already working. She was as in a
We shall
linguist, the person
take it
would
all.
need
Incoming.
everything written in a language that didn't exist in the human database. She'd grown up while drifting in the
Brace yourselves.
the solar system, one of those strange inherited habitats that had been passing through the same elliptical orbit for generations.
Adrenaline
Tended by a
ball.
community that had developed its own customs. And one of theirs was mandatory silence. in all
You
shared
won't
spaces.
believe your eyes.
No speaking in corridors, no speaking in common rooms.
We shall
Conversation
take it all.
quarters.
All together.
She'd spent her formative years in a world where silence was not the absence of something, but practice in itself, discipline. And the result was a woman who was genuinely
Brace yourselves.
more comfortable in the company of their languages.
Ah, I see. This is much
She'd
too
memorized
easy for you.
412 of them.
Let's make it
She
more
kept them
exciting.
catalogued on a
Now
drive
incoming.
Marvelous.
around her neck, next to her skin. Someone else might keep a photograph. When she was tired or stressed, she had a habit of mouthing the phonemes of extinct languages under her breath, not as a tick, but as a comfort. When you'd have something I filmed her doing it, and when she woke up on approach, she didn't notice the camera for maybe a minute.
Forged
She had
away.
good instincts, Elira.
Brace
She was one of the
yourselves.
most genuinely brilliant people I'd ever met. I think that's why
Persevere.
it was so hard to watch. She understood everything that was happening.
Back and fighting.
Right up until she was too far gone to tell us what she understood. Brooke Severin was in the weapons locker running diagnostics when we found him. Not because the diagnostics
It's almost perfect.
because Rook
Professor
always
Hart
needed something to
raised
do
the
with his
ending.
hands.
That's the stuff. Forged
The
away.
security chief in his body was a man with what surviving a plasma implosion looks like.
Adrenaline. Brace yourselves. Incoming.
Roughly 60% of his musculature,
Adrenaline ball.
most of his nervous system.
All kinds of things. See?
After the accident,
I need healing.
Seriously, four-person team to walk out of the wreck site. They only walked because the reconstruction team was straight and used techniques that were technically stage methods. Their nervous system fired faster than natural human reflexes, which
Adrenaline rising.
quality that I can only describe as twitching
Brace yourselves.
in a specific
Nice and weak.
What
sharp, small
fun!
movements, sudden corrections,
I need a
like a
rest.
sensor array running calibration checks.
I'll give you this orb. That impatient man with sharp teeth gave it to me.
He slept
I
inside
want
the
you
bed,
to have it.
always every night.
We'll come back soon and play
His
another
wife.
game together.
He said, took
Watch
someone
out! Creatures from the beyond!
rather
Yoko's
than
here to...
philosophical.
Oh,
That some
what?
habits were just
Guys
about
already
the
took care
feeling
of it.
of having something solid between you and the dark. I remember thinking that was a very specific way to put it. He was the crew's designated skeptic about extraterrestrial life. Not hostile to the idea, he told me
There!
during a pre-mission interview
did
I'd
that
filmed
right.
for the
I
documentary.
opened the way back.
Just
Come on.
unconvinced. The universe was probably just space, he thought. Big,
Nice
old,
work.
and empty
Now,
in ways that
let's
mattered.
see here.
He hoped he
Looks
was
like
wrong.
that's enough power to
He said
open
that
the main
plainly
portal.
and without defensiveness. He said it like a man
I
making a
did
bet
it.
he
We
genuinely
did it.
wouldn't mind losing.
What? Whoa!
He lost it within an
This
hour
place
of
is
approach.
incredible.
Sine Quay was in the observation deck when I passed through,
Just
which surprised
look
nobody.
at it.
Reactor
Sine,
initialization
our
sequence
astrophysicist,
interrupted.
She had that
Sorry.
very specific kind of brilliance
What now?
that
Run
presents from the
diagnostics.
outside
Diagnostics
like a mild
complete.
and benign
User
eccentricity,
ineptitude exception
right up until you
1189.
realize how deep the water goes.
Obstinate.
She'd spent 15 years
Ungrateful.
mapping black holes in the
Reboot.
outer Milky Way,
Reboot completed.
alone
Hello
mostly,
again.
on long transit
Well,
survey missions where the
Tatis?
company was bad and the
Initialization
data was
sequence
extraordinary.
Do
interrupted.
this.
And
Again.
she'd developed in that
Sorry.
time a theory that she'd been trying to get
Possible.
published.
Denial of actuality acknowledged. Solution deemed ineffective. Sorry.
Wonder if
Metaphorically,
I'm not
try
interested.
Putting them into those reactors.
Forward AI personality feedback to System Architect. System Architect currently logged in. Alert. AI personality.
The galaxy's history of mergers and star formation, dormancy,
Whoa,
followed
buddy.
patterns more consistent
okay.
with
We're just
biological
here to,
processes than
you know,
with purely physical
stop
ones.
you. You're
Every
literally
major
tearing
journal had
apart the
rejected
fabric
it.
of the mists.
She kept the rejection letters in a folder on her desk. She'd labeled eventually. She carried a notebook everywhere she went, filled so densely with handwriting. The pages were stiff. She had a habit of being
This is the price of your incessant desire to pry into things beyond your understanding. Satisfied? Inconsequential.
for long enough
I'll
that
deal
people
with you
around her
myself.
noticed, and then slept strange about
this?
having noticed.
I found it
She
on
always
that
came
dreadful
back.
pirate you mercilessly
She
slaughtered
blinked.
over and over and
Exactly
over
where she
again.
left off.
Stabilizing
Every
mechanism
time.
reversed. This
She
weapon's
was
full
right about the
potential
galaxy.
is about to become a reality.
This still gets me. She was completely right. Being right about it earned her. And then there was Zeph. He was
Persevere.
talking before they went into the room he was in, the way he always was. Zeph was our terraforming engineer.
I harness the chaos of interminable space-time.
Tell me you watch the way. Brace yourselves. March on. Shake it off.
Reckless thunderhead. You want more?
He had the personality of someone who had grown up
Back in fighting.
Martian habitats, which he had. The first one he'd been evacuated from.
Let's brace
The
all together.
second, age 11. The third, he'd actually had prepared 16.
Obstinate
He
ghost.
had an instinct for the structural
No
systems that the
alternative.
adults had
Yet.
developed.
Oh.
North of
DDR
Cape,
stability
going south.
80%.
Brace yourselves.
Quiet before it went dark.
Brace. March on.
Oxygen recyclers heard silent. Silence. Zeph's nervous system was without direction to
We
danger.
shall shake it off.
Talking to myself.
All together.
Not to communicate.
Brace yourselves.
The edges of things.
Getting up.
It was funny in the way that people who've been genuinely scared are funny.
I harness the
the best
chaos
kind.
of interminable space-time.
A collection of
Watch
swirls,
the way.
jabs,
Brace yourselves. March on. We shall shake the scorch.
this mission.
DDR stability
Told me.
60%.
But he was saving it for the
Sorry for hearing
All
us.
together.
Go away.
The approach to Andromeda took 3 days. 3 came out of suspension. 3 days of watching the galaxy slowly dissolve. A small
March on.
structure
We shall shake it off.
between stars
Persevere.
became visible as we closed the distance. Filmed all of it. The rest of the crew left the room.
Brace yourselves. Adrenaline rising.
That's the feature of the environment.
Incoming.
Nation of people who accepted something as permanent.
Shake it.
The second
Persevere.
approach, Simon said something that changed the texture of the silence inside the ship, though none of us could have explained exactly why at the time. She was standing at the sensor console scrolling through spectral readings, and she said without looking up that the light coming from Andromeda was wrong.
Getting
I
up.
asked her what she meant. She said that the light was old, in a way it shouldn't be. Just like all light from that distance is old. 2.5 million years ago, the frozen age of the galaxy as it existed before the species came
Brace yourselves.
old in a different quality.
March on.
Exhausted. She said it was like reading a letter from someone, having a feeling before you'd have understood the words.
I harness the chaos
Person
of
who wrote it
interminable
was
space-time.
The light was still
together.
still crossing the void. The sources had left were gone, but not all of them.
Brace yourselves.
Enough that it led toward the strongest
March on.
like a fire that was burning down before the smoke swept the desert.
Persevere.
Brooke stopped cleaning his weapon, set it down, then we were there.
I harness the chaos
First
of
panic
interminable
system
say
in our approach
cyanide
corridor
triggered the final
appeared on the long-range
sequence.
sensors on
There's
day
no
3.
stopping it.
And when the visual
Attention,
feed resolved
diffraction
and the
imminent.
viewport gave us our first clear look, I remember the specific quality of my own silence. Not frightened, not yet. Just the complete stillness of a mind that has received information it doesn't have a category for, and is trying to build one in real time. The planet was covered in towers. Not a city. Towers. Billions of them, covering every landmass from the equator to the poles. Identical in form, identical in spacing, arranged in a grid of such absolute geometric precision that for a moment it read to the human eye as a natural formation, the way basalt columns can look, designed when they're not. But these were not natural. They rose 50 meters from the ground. Narrow and dark, their surfaces finely worked in ways the magnification cameras began to reveal as we orbited closer. Carved surfaces, layered inscriptions, writing dense enough
Follow
that from
me.
orbit it looked like texture. The planet's atmosphere was intact and breathable. The temperature was survivable, and the entire surface was absolutely, completely,
Violence, is it?
totally silent.
I
No signals, no electromagnetic emissions,
Forge the
no
way.
heat signatures, consistent with active machinery. Nothing to suggest that anything down there would be on in any meaningful
That's the
sense for a long
stuff.
time. We orbited for 6 hours. Nobody spoke much. Valor was the one who finally said it. He said very quietly that the towers were burial structures. He said it with the flat
Scarlet's
certainty
gonna
of
have my
someone stating
skull.
something they know rather than something
What
they've
now, Captain?
concluded.
You don't take
When
cannonballs
Simon
digging out
asked how
your
he could be
line.
sure from orbital
I'm dead
distance,
either
he
way.
said nothing.
Might as well
He
strap
stood
in
at the
for a
viewport
decent
and looked
fight.
at the planet for another full
Got it.
minute and then
I'll
walked
undock
away.
the airships.
I'll
I
raise
watched
the
the obsidian
gangplanks.
implant in the side of his face pulse once, dim and slow, the way it did near unknown signal sources.
This is what your curiosity
something.
gets you.
Suddenly surfaced in the next minute. Zep, Rook, Songo. They were stayed aboard and monitored as the shuttle broke through the atmosphere and the city broke up around us on final approach.
Never give up.
Tried to look at everything at once, the way I always did, not wanting to miss the shot. The streets were wide, paved with material, something like stone or concrete. Buildings were large and structured, It was not from the shuttle. It was not from anything we had documented touching. It was simply there, under his fingernails, as if he'd reached into something with his bare hands and it had come away with him. Zeph laughed it off. He said he must have touched something he shouldn't have. His hands were shaking when he said it, and he knew that I could see them shaking, and we both pretended I couldn't. I went through my footage from the surface that night, frame by frame, the way I always do. I found the shot eventually, in a sequence from mid-afternoon. The camera, panning across the main boulevard, would walk down in the background of the frame, 40 meters behind our group, standing in an open doorway of a building we had not entered, not approached. There was a figure, standing still, suited,
Brace your horse, march on.
Horrid! Unleash the cannons!
Aye, aye, Captain.
The door was empty after.
All together.
A single frame for 1/24th of a second of recorded reality. Something was standing in that
We
doorway.
brace yourselves.
I labeled the file. I kept it. I didn't sleep. The next morning, Lyra called the crew together. I spent the night looking through the inscriptions, putting images from the cameras, running them through the linguistic archive. She stood at the center of the hall,
Ensure it. Brace
I was
yourselves.
entirely still.
We
We all
shall
got some dreams.
incoming.
She told us that it was conscripted every year. Every inscription she needed to process.
Brace yourselves. That's the stuff.
Same phrase translated into every
Brace yourselves.
conveying the same meaning without variation. She estimated there were hundreds of thousands of words of different civilizations writing on those walls. She read it to us. Do not be loud, do not be seen, do not cross the dark between stars. It listens. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then Rook, Ulrok, asked a practical question. What listens? Elira said she didn't know yet. She said there was something else. Embedded in the inscriptions. Across every listening information.
Incoming.
Was a symbol.
Team sync reaching full capacity.
Persevere.
Better let this reach out.
Brace yourselves. Never give up.
Not constructed from recognizing the blocks. A word that appealed to me invented.
Brace yourselves. March on. That's the stuff.
Skyhammer calibrated to red.
She wrote it in a notebook and showed it to Vader without showing the rest of us. I was
Forge
forced
the way.
to watch
We
his
shall
face.
brace
He looked at
incoming.
it for a long time. Pulse was the same slow, dim flicker I'd seen it in. He said, I've seen this before. She said, where? He said, you need to show you something. Took her to his quarters.
Brace.
He
Make
told me
haste.
himself later that day. I already knew most of it before he said the words. She had a journal,
Persevere.
old, spinal, cover soft from 30 years of handling. He kept his chest. Margins.
All together. Brace yourselves. Forge the way.
Had ever heard of Project Far Shore or Andromeda or the civilizations that built those towers. We'd been drawing something carved into the walls to
Brace yourselves. Brace yourselves.
told his therapist that it showed him compelling.
Persevere.
His quotes, his name was true. Something. We just never had a language that contained it until
Servant of the Lord, walk
turn
this
the
land.
camera. We saw me do it.
Brace yourselves. Never give up.
On some level, it was relieved as a twist. That night, sitting alone in the observation deck, Valor held glass of water up to the front. I was filming from the corridor, quiet enough that he hadn't heard me. The surface of the water was vibrating. Gently, steadily, in a slow rhythmic pulse.
Brace yourselves!
Set it back down.
Adrenaline rising!
The next 3 days broke everything open. We widened the survey to cover as much of Andromeda as our drone array could reach. What came back over those 3 days was something we processed in stages. First, the data itself. Dozens of planetary systems, then hundreds, all the same. Then, the scale, every planet, every system, every corner of the galaxy's nearest arm.
Brace yourselves! Persevere!
Extinguished artificial suns massive stellar engineering constructs that would have taken civilizations tens of thousands of years to build, shut off. Some roads that fill atmospheres, surfaces that were pressurized. The world's surroundings destroyed by war, shutdowns of fire, folded precision and specialization
Brace yourselves!
Looking out from the dead zones, civilization went silent. It radiated outward from the center of the galaxy, like a wave, like a pulse expanding through water. Or, she said, like a search pattern. Something at the center of Andromeda had woken up and moved outward until everything within 260,000 light years had gone silent. It had taken approximately 400 million years to reach the outer arms. Nobody asked what was at the center. I think we all already knew we didn't want the answer to that. Then Saini said the other thing. She'd been modeling the dark matter distribution, the way the invisible mass that makes up most of a galaxy's material is arranged in the space between the stars, and it was structured in a way that shouldn't be possible through natural gravitational processes alone. Dark matter distributes based on the mass and movement of the stars and gas around it. What she was seeing in Andromeda was shaped, deliberately and consistently organized across hundreds of millions of light years of space.
Brace yourselves!
The result of something intentional. I think the civilizations didn't just die, she said. I think they went into the dark, into the space between the stars, into the matter we can't directly see. I think they've been there for a very long time, and I think they've been trying to communicate something to us since the moment we arrived. Rook said, "What are they trying to tell us?" Saini looked at her notebook and at the viewport, and at her hands. For whatever they've been hiding from since
Brace
the
yourselves!
sun
March on!
notices you're here. She never wrote another word in the notebook. From that morning on, whenever I saw her with a pen,
Forge
she
the
was
way!
drawing the word. What happened with Zeph, I want to describe carefully because I think it was the piece of this that I recovered longest, and the piece that says the most.
Brace yourselves!
What shepherd silence actually does to the people it finds. The morning he was scheduled to leave, Zeph went out to do the final pre-launch check on the shuttle. Standard procedure, 20 minutes. He was gone for 45. When I went to find him, he was standing at the edge of the landing platform, in absolute stillness, facing out into the dead city.
Brace yourselves!
I called his name twice. No response at the time. When I put my hand on his shoulder, he turned around turned slowly and looked at me with his face wearing an expression that was almost his. He smiled. It was his actual smile. Warm, open, real. And he said, "I was just thinking, I know every street in this city. I've always known my way around here. I think I've been here before." I said very carefully, "You haven't been here before, Zeph. None of us have." He nodded, considering. Then he said, "No, but someone who used to live inside me has." No distress in his voice, no fear. He said it the way you'd say you recognized the song. He walked past me back into the shuttle and didn't bring it up again. When I checked his hands as he passed, the organic
Brace
ash was
yourselves.
back under his fingernails. He had been standing
March
on a
on.
metal platform for 35 minutes, but touched nothing.
Incoming!
We left that day in a dead city far below us. And then the ship, the stars entered, spread out around us, ancient and exhausted. And I want to be honest with you. There was a part of me, as the ship turned toward home, that genuinely thought it would be over.
I owe you one.
That we had found the graveyard and understood its message and were going home to tell you. That would be the end of this was. I was wrong about that. I understand now that I was wrong about that.
All together.
Into Andromeda's space. There was no over. There was no
Make
over.
haste!
That's the thing the message on the walls was trying to tell us. And we understood the words, but not what the words meant about our situation, which was that the warning was not for us. It was for whoever came next. The people who wrote it were already past the point where the warning could help them. The journey back was 11 weeks, and I need you to understand that what happened during those 11 weeks didn't happen loudly. There were no breakdowns, no confrontations, no moments that
Brace
led to
yourselves
clear
all
this crisis
together.
watching from outside. What happened was quiet. It was the slow kind of change that you don't see or know it's
Persevere!
happening. Only after, when you look at who someone was and compare them to
Watch the way!
and try to find where the distance opened up.
Brace yourselves!
Theodore stopped speaking on day 4 of the return. Not dramatically.
March on!
He simply stopped using his voice and started carrying a small writing pad, turning it towards whoever needed information from him, and waiting calmly for a response. He communicated everything necessary. He was still
All
fully
together!
himself.
Brace yourselves! Brace yourselves!
The only difference was the silence, and the fact that I discovered one morning when he knocked the pad from his hand and it fell face up on the corridor floor.
We shall return!
The pages he wasn't writing messages on were covered edge to edge in the wood. Not once. Not as a doodle.
Brace yourselves! Never give! March on!
The handwriting was getting smaller, denser, falling into the page you wrote. And the wrote constantly. Notes, loose pages, anything she had access to. And the language wasn't any of the 412 she memorized.
Brace
It was the
yourselves!
one from the rules. She told me once, in a clear stretch of her thought, that she wasn't choosing to
Incoming!
it felt more like a transcription. Something was speaking in a message to find it clearly. Writing was the only way to keep up. She seemed
Brace
calmer than
yourselves!
she's been.
March on!
I want to tell you that her calmness was the most frightening thing I witnessed on the return trip, because I knew what it meant. I'd watched enough of the translation work to understand that the things being written on those walls were written by
Brace yourselves!
accepted what was coming. The
March
calmness was
on!
the calmness of
Incoming!
acceptance. Rook checked the inside of his helmet visor every morning. I know because I'd placed a small camera in the locker after he came to me to quietly on the interior surface of the visor and asked me not to say anything to the others.
Brace
I counted
yourselves!
them each morning. In week 2 the count was 12. In week 4 somewhere over 14. In week 7 without counting. The next morning he didn't take it out to look. He just put it on. Cyanide-filled notebooks with the same argument approached from 50 different angles. The same conclusion drawn in 50 different ways.
Brace yourselves!
And I
Brace
read them when
yourselves!
she was sleeping, because I needed to understand. She had a name for what we'd encountered, written in her private shorthand throughout. The shepherd silence. She never said it aloud. In notebook, she tried everything she could to describe what it was. And the most she could arrive at was what it wasn't. Not a creature, not a weapon, not a civilization. Something older than biological life. Something that predated the first stars. The universe is
Brace yourselves. Adrenaline rising. Never give up.
are 10 billion years old. Whatever had silenced that galaxy had been operating longer than those stars
persevere.
existed. She wrote that she thought humanity was attracted specifically to crossing intergalactic space. That reaching across the
Brace yourselves.
galaxies was a signal of a particular kind.
March on.
Announcement. But something about the ceiling of her ambition was that to get there. And she wrote near the end of the last notebook she filled that she believed
Kill 'em
there was
all.
already a world Earth. That the moment the Aravet entered into space, reaching out to
Launch the
crossing
way.
represented,
Brace yourselves.
registered,
March on.
the response had already begun.
Shake it off.
She wrote that and stopped writing. The pen was still in her hand. The ink spread slightly from where the ink had been resting on the page, as if she'd just put it down. Zeph talked, right up until he didn't. Zeph talked, because that was who he was, and the
Brace
version of him who
yourselves.
was still Zeph. Fought to stay that way,
Adrenaline full.
but the
We
stories
shall
changed.
shake it.
He
All
described
together.
places none of us had
Never
been.
give up.
He talked about buildings in the dead city, not the ones we walked through, the sealed ones.
Never have too much treasure.
With the easy familiarity of someone describing their own home. The height of certain ceilings, the feel of the floor material, the way sound travelled in a large hall. He'd stop mid-sentence sometimes and go distant, and when he came back he'd apologise and laugh, and it was genuinely his laugh. And he was using it to apologise for what was happening to him, as if it was something he'd accidentally done. Near the end of week 9, he sat across from me at dinner and described the view from the top of one of the burial towers, the spread of the city below, the way the towers formed a pattern you couldn't see from the ground, the quality of the light, the sound the wind had made between the towers before there was no more wind. He stopped and looked at his plate and said, "Long time ago." He
Are
said
those
it quietly.
tree people? They look
It didn't
angry.
sound like
Be
it was coming
careful.
from him, or even from whatever was sharing the space inside of him. It sounded like the memory itself, still carrying the weight of having been real, still feeling the loss of something as simple as the wind. The footage got worse as we got closer to home. Not corrupted, not glitched, wrong. Each night's review turned up something new.
Judging
in the
by your
background of
slack
shots
jaw
filmed in
and
empty
torpid
rooms.
silence, it seems I
Doors
misunderstood your
standing open
involvement.
in a wall
Please,
I
follow
knew from
me.
the ship's schematics contained no door.
Apologies for the garlands and the
Handwritten above the
gladiator.
surface in a section
I
of the ship.
presumed you were sent to
No one had
collect a
reason to
debt.
approach.
I can see I was
Once, a corridor
hasty.
shot from week 6
I'll get the
paused
door.
on a frame showing
My
the floor.
device was damaged in the prior
Far out.
Brace yourselves. Watch the way.
Not been there when I filmed. I watched that
My name is
footage
Arms. We should form a mutually beneficial
alliance. The odds are against our survival otherwise.
Let's discuss our team strategy. You picked
these creatures harder than basic.
I'll prepare my ship.
A fascinating monstrosity.
Intricate. Richly balanced.
Exquisitely
There wasn't a
dangerous.
message.
Kudos, Scarlet.
It wasn't in any form or frequency our system.
It remains made from useful. Mother always said, never made the implements you're
Steady.
given.
The pulse pattern that they were recognized before me.
Persevere.
Absolutely still. And then reached without looking across the console and picked up the glass of water he kept there and held it out in front of him. The surface of the water was vibrating.
Your
The same
progress
rhythm,
is
the
adequate.
same pulse
Keep
he'd been
moving.
hearing
There are
and
more
feeling
altars
since we
ahead.
arrived. The same thing he could detect from us. And that would be getting louder since we entered the return leg of the journey. He reached for his writing pad without putting the glass down. He wrote 2 sentences and held the pad up so the whole crew didn't come with us. It was already there. Nobody said anything for a long time.
Brace yourself. Forged
We
away.
reached Earth 4 days later. We submitted everything, every footage, every document, every piece of record I had accumulated over the entire mission. The agencies that received the material thanked us and told us to rest and said they would follow up. They were calm in the way that
This may example prove that violence is your strong suit.
you're delivering.
Speaking of which, let's move
I came to
forward.
believe in the weeks after I got home.
We're
They
nearing
told me
the
to
ultimate
accept it 4 days ago.
experiment.
It's not new.
An entity
I
you
think it had been arriving
the
at
DDR in
days for some
disrepair
time
after our first
before we came
meeting.
home,
Or a
but no one knew.
But first,
Brace
another
yourself.
research
When
experiment
we came
to
back and
overcome.
told them that the
This
thing
is the
had
some
become
extraordinarily deadly
clear
skills.
in
Be
a way
ready?
that closed off every remaining comfortable interpretation. I've been home for 3 months. Every night I go through my footage the way I always have, looking for the thing I missed, the frame that changes the shape of what happened. I
Hallucinations.
haven't found it.
A remarkable
What I
tactic.
found instead
Stay alert.
last night was footage I didn't film. I verified the timestamp. I've checked the camera serial number against the manufacturer registry. It is my camera. The recording was made 17 days after I came out. On it, I'm standing in a building I do not recognize, in a room with no windows and walls, the material that is almost stone. It has that same quality as the pavement of Night City. Almost stone, white.
Brace yourself.
I'm writing
Forged away.
in front of me. I cannot see what I'm writing from the camera angle. My back is to the lens. My body language is calm. My movements are deliberate and unhurried. The movements of someone who knows exactly what they're doing.
Go on. Given your penchant for murdering things, your mathematical chances are almost greater than zero.
Brace yourself.
Not because I'm afraid of what I see, because I'm afraid
Never give
I
up.
see it. I'm afraid that I will recognize the room. I'm afraid I will recognize the handwriting on the wall, because I've been writing in my sleep for 2 weeks now. I'm waking up to find pages covered in something that is almost writing, and not quite writing. I've not told anyone, because I keep thinking it will stop. There's a tone that draws to this war. I've been hearing it for 2 weeks and telling myself it has an ordinary explanation.
How dare you
It has the same
defile
rhythm
my
as
birthday,
water
man?
It has
All
the same rhythm
your
as the
fears,
pulse I feel in my hands.
all your delirium,
The pulse that has been there since
fading
Incoming.
suffer and die in terror.
because it is the only thing that makes it feel real, rather than something happening only inside my head. History only matters if someone witnesses it. I've believed that for my entire adult life. I organized everything around it. And I'm still here, still running the cameras, because I'm not able to be anything other than what I am. All I am is a witness.
Eternally
Whatever is happening to me,
thine
whatever
and
has been happening
serpents
since we came home,
entwined
this
in
record
me.
is still here.
You,
I'm hearing
they
it.
die
That
now.
means it exists. I'm going to finish this recording, and then I'm going to watch the rest of that clip. I need to see what I'm writing on the wall. I need it to be documented, witnessed, real, in the way that only things that have been seen can be real. That's the only way I know how to face anything. Put the camera on it. One more thing. Tonight, if it's clear where you are, go outside. Let your eyes adjust to the dark. Find the constellation Andromeda in the autumn sky, and look for the smear of pale light in it. The smoke cloud. Abdurrahman al-Sufi called it
It's easy.
164. The light of a candle seen through a horn,
You take
Simon
solace in
Marius
knowing
said
your
in
destructive
1612.
exuberance has at
2.5
least balanced
million
the
light
ledger
years away.
between us.
Trillion
I
stars.
can reconstruct the
10
diaphanous
billion years
diffraction
of history.
randomizer, and you
The
no longer
closest
have to
major
feel
galaxy to our
guilty
own,
for derailing my
falling
mission.
toward us at 68 miles per second. Patient and inevitable, and absolutely silent in every frequency we have ever been able to measure. When you find it, I want you to understand something about the light you're seeing. It left its source 2.5 million years ago, before our species existed, before Homo sapiens walked the earth. the light reaching your eyes right now was already in transit, already crossing the void, already on its way to a planet that didn't yet have anyone on it to receive it. You have never seen Andromeda as it is. No one ever has. We can only ever see it as it was 2.5 million years ago, a frozen image arriving perpetually late. We went to see what it is now. We found out. The tone is getting louder. Thank you for listening. I mean that. I mean it more than I've meant anything. It already knows your name.
Knew I should have sprayed you all with mosquito repellent before you left. All those biting things just waiting to... Oh, no, never mind.
Together.
Return to normal parameters.
Brace yourselves. Pace yourselves. Forge the way. Shake it off. Together. Never give up. Shake it off. Brace yourself. March on. Incoming. Getting up. Together, we shall return. Getting up. Brace yourselves. Back in fighting condition. March on. Signal.
Swamped. Squirming. Hungry. Crawling. Let me know when you want to move on.
cockpit had gone dim enough that the yellow rings around the breaker keys looked brown. Dust drifted through the beam of my panel light. A crack ran across the left display where my helmet had struck it during impact. Beyond the armored glass, the world kept flashing in hard white bursts from fires scattered across the plain and up the canyon wall. Each flash showed the same truth in pieces: wrecked armor, broken carriers, bodies on black stone, and my walker still upright by some stubborn act of weight and balance. I kept my hands moving because a cockpit full of alarms punished stillness. Reactor at 62% and falling. Main gun feed jammed after the fourth shell. Left arm gun mount gone. Right leg drive dragging, feedback spiking every time I flexed the knee. Cabin pressure steady for now. Air loop dirty. Filter load climbing. External mics half dead. Command net down to static. Burst cries. And one calm female voice repeating evacuation codes from somewhere far above me. My name is Nolan Hollister, Reserve Captain, Heavy Walker Corps, attached to the ground assault on Highport. Before the army pulled me back into uniform, I had spent most of my life on this world moving ore and fuel through the redstone cuts in machines built to carry more weight than common sense ever should. Men in offices like to say a heavy walker felt like an extension of the body. Men who said that had never dragged one through bad ground with a split axle and a convoy clock burning behind them. A walker felt like work. Good work when the seals held and the servos answered. Grave work when something big had gone wrong. Something big had gone wrong all across the valley. The assault was supposed to open Highport in one hard push before dawn. Orbital strikes would break the defense rings. Drop battalions would cut the service routes. My battalion would take the canyon approach and hammer the lower shield bunkers while carriers rushed the freight slopes. That was the clean version. The real one began to come apart when the orbital feed died during descent and half our landing columns hit ground with blind maps. Then the dead in front of the bunkers started moving again. Then our own dead rose with them. I had seen infected footage during the briefings. Everyone had. Grey smear under the skin. Spikes of waste code in med implants. Muscle tissue hijacked by some crawling machine plague that rode signal traffic, body heat, and power flow. The briefings showed lab pens and restraint slabs and neat short clips of bodies jerking under white light. They had no room for what happened when thousands of fresh dead lay mixed with shell casings, broken armor, gun parts, med gear, field radios, loader claws, shattered drone rotors, and the raw current bleeding out of the battlefield. A body hauled itself over the hood of a burned carrier 30 yards ahead of me. White bones showed through torn meat at the shin. A chest plate from one of ours had sunk into the ribcage and set there as if the corpse had grown around. The right forearm ended in a rifle, the stock chewed away, the receiver buried in flesh up to the ejection port. The thing used the weapon as a crutch while it climbed. A second one rose behind it with a broken faceplate welded into the side of the skull like a second jaw. I reached for the external guns on instinct. The left trigger gave me dead pressure. The right arm answered with a low feed growl and one short burst. The rounds tore the first corpse open and spun the second off the carrier. Both bodies kept twitching while bits of armor and bone drew inward toward the ruin of a tank split open farther out on the plain. Cables dragged across the rock. A wheel hub rolled uphill by itself. Something big under that wreckage pulled metal and flesh toward its center. I cut the arm gun. Each burst mattered now. The port voice came through again, clearer this time, and I killed the static filter to hear it. Highport quarantine tower to surviving ground elements. Primary gate sealed. Airfield lane sealed. Cargo tower under internal lock. Any surviving personnel move to marked emergency shelters or defensive strongpoints. Challenge grid follows. A string of codes spilled out. I copied none. My left display was cracked. My uplink was shredded, and the shelters lay across open ground already full of moving dead. Strongpoints were for troops with numbers, ammunition, and walls that still stood. Highport sat on the canyon rim behind a line of shield towers and cargo planes. The main road climbed through the redstone
realm of the
and I knew every bad bend of it. I knew where the old mine company had blasted shelves into the walls. Knew where the ore seams bent close enough to the surface that storms of charged scrap used to dance through the gaps when haul trucks dumped broken drill heads and torn track plates. Knew the freight ascent under the starport, a buried lift road built to bring ore trains to the smelter stacks before Highport ever turned into a military hub. I had driven those lower grades in civilian coveralls, with coffee in a dented thermos, and shift whistles carrying down from the rim at dawn. Now I was coming back up under armor to help smash a port I had once hauled for. If any gate on this world still had a chance of opening for a handful of survivors, it was somewhere above that old freight route. The open flats between me and the port were a graveyard of half-burned armor and dead signal towers. My walker would die out there. In the canyon I had walls, grades, and a road cut for machines with ridiculous weight. That road had scars, narrow turns, and one bridge at the lower ravine where half a dozen wrecks could jam into a crossing after a collapse. I got the right arm around, forced the walker to pivot, and limped toward the canyon mouth. Every step sent a grind through the right leg drive. The cockpit floor tapped against my boots in ugly little shocks. Outside, the walker's weight pressed broken earth flat and cracked loose sheets of clinker from the roadbed. The engine note behind my seat had dropped from a steady work growl into a rough cycling thrum that told me the coolant path on one side had taken rubble. I heard all of it the way another man might hear his own joints after a cold night. Bodies covered the approach in drifts and clumps where units had died trying to retreat into the canyon. Some wore our black assault shell. Some wore the pale, segmented armor of the port defenders. Death had made them equal, and the plague found no reason to care which side had paid for them. A hand moved under a carrier trail. A face turned toward me with one eye gone and a length of data cable sunk through the cheek and into the neck. A knot of corpses had fused around a dropped med frame, so that the frame's white support ring sat above them like a column of flame. The canyon took me in with steep red walls rising on both sides. Shell scars popped the rock. Fires crawled across patches of spilled fuel. The road narrowed and bent left around a row of toppled loaders. I passed 3 dead walkers from my battalion in less than 5 minutes. One had gone down on its face and dug a trench with its own scar. Another sat against the wall with the entire cockpit blown open, pilot still strapped inside under a crust of black gas. The third was gone from the waist down. The upper hull lay twisted across the road, arm guns sunk into the dirt, and something had been feeding from the exposed internals. It kept moving. The ravine crossing appeared at the next bend, and my stomach tightened into a hard knot of numbers and weight and old road instinct. The bridge was still there in the broadest sense of the word. The road had collapsed into the cut sometime during the assault. In its place, 5 wrecked machines had fallen and wedged together from wall to wall. 2 tanks, 1 ore loader, 1 burned carrier, and the front half of a walker from the port side had locked into a slanted, unstable causeway over a drop deep enough that the fires below looked like lamps at the bottom of a shaft. Metal plates hung loose over open air. A snapped crane arm from the loader had speared into the opposite wall and held part of the mess in place. The road on my side had broken clean at the lip, leaving a 6-yard step down into the first tank. I stopped and leaned toward the glass until my forehead touched the rim of the tank display. Below the bridge, the ravine floor had become the center of something worse than a scattered infected on the ground. Bodies and armor lay piled in black heaps among the rocks. Those heaps kept shifting. A tank turret rolled across the stone on a bed of joined limbs. A chain of bodies dragged a twisted gun carriage toward a mound of plate and flesh that rose shoulder high off the ravine floor. The mound flexed around a core of blue-white arc light. Each flash made spent casings, knife blades, mag clamps, shrapnel, and loose teeth jump toward it. I saw the shape of a face sink into the outer layer and vanish under a wash of scrap a second later. I had crossed bad bridges in ore country. Weight made its own lessons. A driver learned to watch how a span settled, where the support took load, how much flex a bolt line could have before a joint walked sideways and let gravity collect its due. This crossing demanded that kind of attention. Every move would need to count. I ran a quick survey with the right arm camera. The first tank hull had enough width for 1 foot if I angled the walker in from the shoulder. The second wreck sat lower and would take the next step. After that, I would need to shift left and put part of the walker's mass against the canyon wall, using the anchor winch to keep the upper body from swinging out over the drop. Hollister, to any surviving ground unit in the Redstone lower cut, I said over local. I'm at the ravine bridge. If anybody answers, keep it short. Static washed through. A burst of screaming cut in and died. Then silence. I switched to the maintenance channel and killed every feed I did not need. The dashboard darkened one panel at a time. Tactical overlays gone. Squad transponder grid gone. Long-range rescue ping still live, set by the suit system after impact. I stabbed at the control twice before it obeyed. The ping carrier light stayed green. Come off. Come off. The system ignored me. The housing had probably jammed under the outer skin during the crash. I would have to rip it out by hand later. Movement stirred below. Dozens of heads turned upwards again. The rescue ping was singing to me. I dropped the external ammo bin from the left rear mount. The clamps blew with a hard crack, and the bin tumbled into the ravine, trailing linked shells. Pain ran through me sharper than it should have. Those rounds were days of training and life and chances thrown away in a second. The walker stood a little easier after me. Forward load shifted back when I needed it. I armed the right side anchor line and shot it into the wall across the bridge. The spike punched deep into red stone. The winch line went tight with a metallic groan that travelled through the hull and into my seat. Easy, I told the machine. Easy now. The first step put the right foot onto the top of the tank hull. The bridge dipped. Loose plating slid off the far side into the darkness. The walker's torso listed left, and the anchor line sat under strain.
Now who are
I eased the left foot down onto the broken road lip.
You may
and bled
call me
power through the knee
Jasmina.
joints until the frame settled.
Now
Second
be
step.
silent.
The left foot came onto the
My
first
body
hull.
is too damaged
Something
to fight.
below pulled at the ankle
I'll grant
with a
you what
series of
protection
hard
I can,
knocks
but
as
be
bits
ready.
of scrap
The
tried to
consequence
climb
of
the leg.
mortals falling on the river of
I shook
souls
them
is
off
unclear.
and felt the right drive
Death may
answer
not
with a
result in the
protesting grind.
expected.
Third step. I moved the right foot onto the carrier wreck and pushed the upper body hard toward the canyon wall. The shoulder scraped rock. Stone burst away and pattered down through the bridge. The anchor line kept me from swinging out. Below, the mound in the ravine had grown higher. It was finding shape. 2 arm-thick bundles of joined bodies rose from its sides and hooked into the underbelly of the bridge. I brought the left foot after it. The bridge shifted under my weight in a long, slow slide that felt like a beast drawing breath. The first tank hull peeled away at the rear and dropped. The whole causeway jerked downward by half a yard. My head struck the seat frame. Warning lights flared across the cracked display. Right leg torque spike. Hip alignment off by 6 degrees. I saw the path ahead in pieces. The burned carrier, the loader's engine deck. The sheared front half of the enemy walker jammed at the far lip. Beyond it, solid road. I could make it. I stepped for the loader. Something hit from below with enough force to rock 300 tons of armored frame. One of the body bundles had reached the walker's left ankle and wrapped itself around the joint. Faces flashed past the camera, half buried under armor scraps and lengths of cable. A machine gun barrel jutted from the mass and fired upward on pure accident or blind purpose, rounds sparking off my lower hull. I stamped down, crushed the thing, and the bridge gave way under the blow. The loader deck tilted. My right leg plunged through a burst seam and wedged to the knee. Alarm shrieked. The upper hull pitched forward. The canyon wall rushed past the glass on my left. I fired the chest thrusters once, short and savage. Heat slapped the hull. The walker heaved upward enough for me to wrench the right leg free. I threw my weight against the left controls and dragged the machine into the enemy walker's broken torso. The bridge behind me collapsed in a roar of tearing steel and falling stone. The far lip came up under the right foot. I shoved every reserve into one lurching final step and landed on the road beyond the ravine. The anchor line snapped behind me with a sound like a gunshot and whiplashed into the dark. I sat there for 3 seconds with my hands locked around the controls and my mouth open under the helmet seal, drawing air that tasted of filter grit and hot metal. The ravine mass had survived the collapse, more than survived. It had found a road upward in the ruins. A dozen infected dragged themselves over the broken lip where the bridge used to meet the far side. They came in jerks and lunges, hauled onward by limbs wrapped in torn armor and lengths of comm wire. Behind them, the bigger thing in the ravine kept climbing through its own dead. I turned the walker and marched. The air warning came on half a minute later. Filter load had jumped into the red. The intake trench ran along the outer spine under a set of armored fins that could shrug off shrapnel and most small arms fire. It could not shrug off the slurry thrown up when the bridge went down. The screens had caught corpse matter, rust flakes, and whatever grey, crawling rubble the plague used to move from body to body. Cabin pressure began to dip in slow, ugly steps. The suit reserve would keep me breathing a while if I sealed the helmet and killed the cockpit feed. After that, I would have a dead machine around me and nowhere to go. The road bent through a narrow slot between 2 leaning walls of red rock. A wrecked ore hole blocked part of the lane
It's
there.
safe here.
I put
I'll
the
wait
walker
for
in
you.
its shadow,
You have work
braced
to
the
do.
right side against the canyon wall, and
If we
locked
can
the
take back
stance.
the 3 Grenth statues
The
from
engine
Dune,
dropped to
we
idle.
can break the seal on the
Every
hull.
impact from
What will
outside
you be
came
doing
clear
while we
through
handle
the
the
hull now.
statues?
Little drumming blows
I need to
from
recover
infected
if I'm
bodies
going to fight
reaching the
Dune.
machine.
Our allies
I
will
opened
allow
the
you to
emergency
retreat.
locker,
Now go.
pulled the maintenance rig over my arm, and checked the suit seal at the wrists and neck. My hands shook once when I tightened the right glove. I hated that. I tightened it again and clipped the intake tool pack to my belt. A corpse slammed against the hull right outside the cockpit. The sound came through the armor like a sledge to a steel door. Still here, I said to the empty seat behind me. The maintenance hatch opened into the dorsal access trench, a cramped crawl space between outer armor and the intake. I hauled myself through and sealed it behind me. The walker's outer skin held the heat of the engine. Dust and black paste coated the trench floor. The service lamp on my shoulder threw a cone of white over the blockage of it. It looked like a butcher's drain after a flood. Flesh, cloth, blood-black foam, chipped paint, shell leaves, hair, teeth, lengths of cable and grey stringy matter jammed the filter grate into a solid block. The fan behind it whined in short, ragged bursts, trying to draw air through a wall of rot and metal. The hull rang below me as bodies struck it. Fingers scraped along the outer plates. One hand stripped a red muscle, and brass cartridge rings fused around the knuckles, hooked over the lip of the trench ahead. I drove the service spike through the wrist joint and kicked the hand away. Work had always come easiest when I could reduce it to parts. Tools, blockage, flow, risk, motion. Do one task, then the next. I got the grate loose with the cutter. The first slab of filth came through in a rock collapse and dropped into the fan housing. The rotor seized with a brutal clang. I cursed, dug both gloved hands into the mess, and pulled it out in fistfuls, while the walker shuddered under impact. Something struck the outer skin with enough force to dent the plate beside my left shoulder. A rifle muzzle punched through the seal inches from my visor and spat 2 rounds into the trench. One hit the duct wall and burst sparks over me. The second smashed the service lamp. Darkness swallowed the trench. I froze for 1 beat, switched to visor light, and got back to room. The fan housing cleared enough for the blades to turn. Air rushed through with a rough storm of growl. The flow meter on my wrist climbed from critical to full. Good enough for the next mile. Good enough if luck had not left the canyon entirely. hand. The rescue pinged as I sat another 6 feet down the trench under a blister plate. That green carrier light in the cockpit had told me to think. The ping was still calling. Every dead thing in range would keep coming until I shut it down. I crawled forward on elbows and knees while the hull thudded under me. The blister plate had jammed inward from some earlier impact. I got the pry bar on the landage and forced it open. The rescue unit sat in its nest with the pacing belt. The hardline had welded itself into the socket during the crash. I put the cutter to it. The cutter bit, sputtered, and died when something jerked my right ankle backward. I turned in the trench and slammed the heel of my left boot into a face below the lip. The face came apart from the nose down and still kept trying to climb. More hands reached after it. A length of comm wire whipped across my calf and tightened. I tore the dead wire free, rolled onto my side, and chopped through the rescue hardline with the manual saw. It took 3 savage strokes. The carrier light on the unit went dark. The hands below lost some of their frenzy at once. They still climbed and struck and scraped, but the pattern had gone loose, robbed of the signal they had been following. I tried to pull back. My right sleeve snagged on a torn flange under the blister plate. The metal ripped a line through the suit fabric from elbow to wrist. Cold seal foam burst from the emergency weave and spread under my glove in a tight, prickling sheet. I stared at the rip for one short, stunned second. Grey-black paste from the trench had smeared inside the cut before the foam finished setting. The suit integrity panel on my wrist went from amber to green, which felt like a lie. The seal had to hold. I gave myself that and kept moving. The hull boomed again, a deep hit this time. Something heavier had reached the walker. I got the grate back into place, dogged it tight by feel, and crawled for the hatch with every bruise in my body counting time. Hands found the trench edge behind me. A rifle stock hammered the plate near my boots. I jammed the hatch cycle and rolled through just as fingers stabbed after me through the narrowing gap. The cockpit felt close and hot and human in the best possible way. I sealed the hatch, locked the maintenance access, and slumped into the pilot cradle while the air system coughed grit through the vents. Filter life had dropped to a third. I pulled off the outer glove and looked at my forearm seal. The foam patch had set hard. The pressure line held. Nothing visible had crossed through to the skin. I put the glove back on and lied to myself with full awareness. I could worry later. Later had to exist first. The road climbed into the old mining cuts. The rock walls opened into wider shelves and scars where the company had bitten into the canyon for a century before the port came. Abandoned rail spurs hung over drops. Broken drill towers leaned against the walls. Piles of spoil and dumped machine parts lay everywhere under wind-blown dust and shell scars. The first magnetic surge hit my sensors before it hit the hull. Static ran across the screens and white bands. The compass spun, the right side panel blanked. Then a storm of loose scrap came skittering down the slope from my left in a shrill metallic rush. Drill teeth, cut chain, shell fragments, snapped tools, bolts, and lengths of railway slammed into the walker's legs and armor. Half of it bounced away. The other half stuck for 2 seconds under the pull of the ore seam and then ripped free again when the surge passed. I knew this now. Redstone's lower cuts had always done that when the ore veins near the wall took a charge from weather or bad mining current. On a bad day, a truck could lose half its tool rack to a canyon. On a worse day, the storm would pack rubble into a wheel housing and leave the truck dead in place until a crane dragged it free. My walker had no crane. I switched every guidance aid I could spare to passive and drove by old roadsides, slope roads, and a memory of running freight through them before the army had painted over the mine company signs. The world narrowed to the road 10 yards ahead. The rise of each shelf and the harsh metal chatter of more scrap storms rolling somewhere deeper in the cuts. A voice burst through local comm so suddenly that I almost put the walker into the wall. Any unit on Redstone Main, answer now. Carrier overturned inside cut 6. Survivors inside. Answer now. Male voice, young, frayed at the edges. A I keyed them up. This is Captain Nolan Hollister. Give me a marker. A burst of static. Then, blue flare, north wall, side cut 6. We can hear you. We've got wounded. Then the voice came again, smaller this time. Please. The world had been full of men saying please over bad radios for 12 hours. Most of them were dead now. Maybe all of them. I turned into side cut 6. The troop carrier lay on its roof against a rock shell, nose crushed. Rear access jammed under a pile of bodies and tangled wood. Blue flare smoke bled upward from a cracked hatch near the rear axle. The carrier's side guns had fired their last belts empty into the slope above it. Bodies covered the ground around the wreck in a mound that looked, at first, like the common dead of a retreat cut down on a choke point. Then the mound shifted. A shoulder blade rose and sank again. A cluster of fingers opened under a wash of blood. Gun barrels stuck from the front at wrong angles, half swollen. The whole pile gave a slow, inward draw as if heat from a trapped cannon pulled it tight. A gestation nest. Field Rumor had used 10 names for them. The Army preferred emergent bio-salvage complex. Men who had cut them open and survived called them meat foundries, which came closer to truth. I brought the walker to a halt over the carrier and keyed the external speaker. Anybody alive in there? Sound off. A woman answered at once. 3. Driver dead. Rear section pinned. We've got 1 serious casualty. Names. Grace Holloway. Traffic control attached to High Port Command. Travis Boone. Mason Rudd. Medic. The title hit me harder than the name.
Keep level
Traffic
0.
control. A living map of port access and quarantine law sitting upside down inside a dead carrier. I brought the right arm gun down over the mound and checked the ammo count. A little over 100 rounds on the feed. Not enough to sweep the whole cut if the nest came apart at once. Plenty to dig a hole in the needle. Mason moving. Still awake, Grace said. He keeps telling Boone not to waste the painkillers on him. A rough laugh came from inside the carrier, then turned into a cough. Mason, person, not just a problem. Travis Boone cut in, all hard edges. Either get us out or get moving, Captain. That pile is working. I looked at the main road behind me. Dust hung there in a long grey ribbon. Through it, far off, shapes were gathering. The wall from the ravine had found the upper cuts. I dropped the walker into kneel mode, locked the right leg, and used the arm gun in short, disciplined bursts to carve a trench through the mound at the carrier's rear. Flesh, armor, and cable blew apart in wet chunks. The pile convulsed. Bodies under the top layer started to rise, dragging pieces of each other with them. One came up with both arms wrapped around a field printer unit sunk into its back like a shell. Another had a line of med injectors punched through the cheek and into the neck, the plungers flexing as the jaw worked. I stepped down from the cockpit with the boarding cable clipped to my belt and the cutter in my right hand. The first infected reached me before my boots hit the carrier's flank. It came low, pushing with a welded mess of shield plate and forearm bones. I drove the cutter through the neck and felt the body twist around the blade without care for the damage. Boone leaned out through the cracked hatch above me and fired a pistol into its face until the skull came apart. "About time," he said. He had a broad, plain face, 40 or close to it, shaved head gone to stubble under dried blood, one eye swollen half shut. He wore troop carrier grey with the rank patches ripped off. The habit in that alone told me plenty. Men tore rank patches when they feared being taken alive by the wrong side, or when they had stopped trusting the chain that gave them rank. "Keep your fire off my back," I said. "Then move faster." Grace Holloway came into view behind him, wedged in the hatch frame. She was younger than the voice had sounded, maybe mid-30s. Dark hair cut short under a traffic control cap, cheek split open to the jawline where something had thrown her against the ceiling during the rollover. Her eyes were clear. That mattered more than anything else in the moment. "Rear bulkhead is bent into the bay," she said. "The only clean way is through the floor plate by Mason." I got my shoulder against the wreck and hauled myself up. Inside, the carrier stank of hot wiring and blood and the copper reek of men running out of luck. Gravity had turned the compartment into a sealing world. Mason Rudd hung in his harness with one hand pressed over a seal patch on his side. His skin had gone pale under the cabin lights, but when he saw me, he managed a ghost of a grin. "Captain," he said, "cut here. Boone says you're too old to eyeball a seam. Boone says a lot. He's loyal that way." It was a medic's kind of joke, made for a room that needed one. I braced, set the cutter, and burned through the seam while Boone kept firing through the hatch at anything that moved outside. The nest woke all around us. The carrier rocked as bodies threw themselves against it. One of the side guns outside began firing single rounds where current flashed through a broken feed. The floor plate dropped. Boone kicked it aside. I got Grace down first and shoved her toward the walker's boarding sling. She did not waste time thanking me. Boone came after her with the pistol still snapping. Mason tried to lower himself and the seal patch on his side gave way. Dark blood sheeted down his armor. I caught him under the arm and took more of his weight than my right shoulder wanted to give.
Hologram projector engaged.
He was light in that bad, injured way where a man had started to lean out. "Can you walk?" I said.
Adrenaline rising.
For a minute. Then lose it. The mound split open around us. The torso rose with half a radio mast sunk along the spine and the backbone for another species. 3 corpses climbed over the carrier roof with their legs tangled together under a net of cable and tall roof tops. Boone shot one and the others kept coming because they shared a need each other to go on. I put the cutter through a knee joint made of shin bone and gun metal and kicked the whole knot into the spoiled slope. Grace made the walker sling and started hauling herself out toward the access point. Mason stumbled. I took his belt and dragged him after me while Boone back toward the walker, firing in hard measured pairs. One round hit a fuel can in the carrier lock. The blast washed the cut in white heat and threw dirt, body matter and metal in every direction. I lost my footing, went to one knee and felt something rake my damaged suit sleeve. Then Boone grabbed the back of my armor and hauled. Between the two of us, we shoved Mason into the sling and got him up. The walker's access bay was built for ammo techs and maintenance men, but it's sealed. In that moment, it might as well have been
Adrenaline fall.
I got Boone in after Mason, sealed the hatch, and climbed to the cockpit with the right arm gun, firing blind bursts through the external camera feed. The nest had broken apart under the blast, and was already reforming around the scraps. The dead came after the walker in 2s and 3s, as I rose to full height and backed onto the main board. Grace dragged herself into the jump seat behind me and clipped in with hands that moved fast and sure. Boone stayed in the bay with Mason, swearing at the medkit. "You really are traffic control?" I asked as the walker turned uphill. "Senior traffic chief," she said. "Civil side before the army took half my staff, most of my hangars, and every habit the port had that made sense. Can you get a gate open?" "I can get you to the only gate that might still answer. Freight ascent under the old smelter line. Cargo tower watches it. Quarantine office sits on the same stack. If the systems still talk to each other, I can argue with them." "Argue?" She looked past me through the glass at the road. "Captain, what are those things behind us?" I let the camera zoom. The ribbon of dust down canyon had thickened into a moving front. Bodies climbed over wreckage and each other in a broad, advancing wall of flesh, armor, and junk metal. It had no clean edges. Every time part of it fell, another part filled the space. Weapons buried in the mass fired at random as current or impact tripped them. Limbs worked under plates. Faces surfaced and sank. "The battlefield," I said. "Coming to collect." The access bay speaker clicked on. Boone's voice came through. "Mason's bleeding into the deck. I sealed it again. He says he got brushed during the pullout." "Brushed how?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "It matters enough that I asked." A pause. Then Mason, thin, and trying for steady. Something from the mound got my neck plate open for a second. Boone jammed it shut. Still owe him for the bruises. Grace closed her eyes once and opened them again. "If he's contaminated, Highport will shoot the whole bay through a vent before they let us inside. He's alive right now. I said. Boone's face hardened. Your machine, Captain. The old cuts narrowed above sun at cut 6. Scrap storms rolled off the walls and crashed metallic sheets of the fluids nearby. I drove slow and heavy, feeling the grade to the walker's feet. Passive mode had blinded most of my long-range senses. Grace's knowledge made up ground the machines had lost. She called each bend, each shelf, each buried drain line from memory, as if she had spent her life drawing maps in the dark. Keep to the inside on this turn, she said. The outer edge washed out during the spring melt 3 years ago. I filed for repair twice. Command turned the crews into bunker labor. I obeyed and heard half the road crumble away under the walkers passing. Boone climbed into the cockpit an hour later, leaving Mason strapped into the bay with medgel and a water line. He moved like a man who had spent his whole career expecting to fight in spaces far smaller than comfort allowed. He kept the pistol in hand and sat on the deck with his back to the bulkhead instead of taking the empty taxi. He's going bad, Boone said. Define bad. He's talking to people who aren't here. Veins at the edge of the wound have gone grey. The skin around his neck cut looks like somebody drew wire under it. Grace rubbed both palms over her face. How long? Sometimes hours, she said before I could ask. Sometimes less. Depends on load, injury, exposure, powered implants, signal traffic. Half a dozen things the med people were still arguing over when I left the tower. Boone looked at the dead display over my shoulder. Gonna solve the problem now. He stays alive while he can, I said. Boone's one good eye settled on me with cool, fat light. And when he starts trying to open the hatch from inside the bed, I pushed the walker through another scrap surge. Bits of iron and shell casing rattled down the armor in a hard metallic blade. Then I deal with that.
Back in fighting
That answer
condition.
gets us buried. Grace leaned forward between us. Both of you listen. The plague follows more than bodies. It follows systems, med tanks, rescue pins, armor handshakes, auto-targeting wake-ups. Last week we had dead dockhands climbing 3 stories of gantry because a crash beacon on a loader kept saying. Quarantine gate came apart because a triage scanner tried to sync the patient tags inside a pile of corpses. She pointed at the disabled panels around me. Every active war system on this machine is a dinner bell. I thought of the rescue ping under the blister plate and the way the dead below the trench had lost some of their pattern when I cut it. Thought of the bridge mast turning toward my walker. Thought of this whole war being fought by men who trusted every emergency system they carried. Then we go dark, I said. Grace gave a hard nod. As dark as a 300-ton walker can go. I shut down the last active targeting loops, the vehicle identification beacon, the friend or foe query cycle, and half the comfort systems that fed the cockpit. The displays dimmed further. The engine note changed, rougher now without the balancing draw of all the systems I had just killed. The walker became a brute thing again, closer to the hall crawlers I had once driven than any sleek battlefield myth. The road answered that choice with its own price. Driving blind in Redstone's upper cuts meant every shelf and storm had to be read through the feet, the wall line, and the rhythm of falling rubble. I knew how. The knowledge cost years. Those years paid out now, one careful step at a time. The wall behind us kept coming. I saw it in glimpses through dust and bends. A broad slope of moving dead forcing itself uphill through old wrecks and fresh rockfall, taking in everybody it touched. The nearer it came, the more of the battlefield it wore. Walker plate, carrier track, port shield mesh, crates, loader claws, broken stretchers. I saw one of our fallen heavy guns sunk through the mass at shoulder height, its barrel swinging as joined limbs beneath it adjusted the angle. It fired once. The shell hit a canyon wall 200 yards below us and blew a section of shelf into the road. The blast wave slapped the walker broadside. Rock crashed down ahead in a rain of red slabs and black dust. I threw the machine toward the inside wall. Stones hammered the hull. One block the size of a cart struck the right thigh joint and sent the drive feedback into the red again. Roads blocked, Grace said. The shelf ahead had collapsed into a jagged hole. Beyond it, the main grade vanished behind more falling rubble. We had room for nothing bigger than a man on foot along the outer edge. An old blast gallery opened in the wall to the left, half buried under spoil. I knew it before Grace named it. Service cut, she said. Old vent tunnel. It runs parallel for half a mile and comes out above the choke. The opening had been drilled for mine air and loading necessary, not wheels. My machine could fit if I scraped half its skin away. Good enough, I said. Boone swore. You'll wedge us. Then I'll wedge us closer to the port. I turned the walker into a blast gallery. Armor shrieked against stone. The right shoulder stripped away a line of antenna studs and outer plating. Dust poured over the glass. In the bay behind us, Mason began muttering in short, broken bursts, repeating med codes and women's names I did not know. The tunnel floor dipped and rose over old rail beds. The walls pressed so close that my arm gun gouged sparks with every step. Twice I had to stop and use the damaged right arm to tear support struts out of the way. Boone left the cockpit to wedge spare plating over the bay hatch because Mason had started striking it from inside. When the tunnel widened enough for me to breathe again, I heard Boone through the intercom. He's asking for his daughter. Grace bowed her head once. His file said divorced, one child. I kept my hands on the controls and the walker inching forward. Keep him talking. Boone answered after a pause. He asked if we were still in the carrier. A harder pause followed. Then he said, I told him we were halfway home. The tunnel opened above the choke into a steep shelf road running straight for the final ascent. Highport rose at the far end on its rim of black stone and steel. Towers ringed the landing field. Cargo cranes stood against the sky with bare ribs. Fires burned in the cluster near the civil palace. One shuttle lay broken on its side near the hanging mouth. Another shape lifted from a distant launch tower and climbed into the dark in a white spear of engine flame before vanishing into cloud. Grace saw it too. Her face tightened with something I knew at once. Counting. We were all counting exits now. The final ascent looked worse than I remembered. The main military gate at the top had sealed with blast slabs. Below it, the old freight approach zigzagged under the cargo stack through concrete shells and ore conveyor housings left from an earlier century. One broad switchback road climbed to a recessed freight mouth under the port. If Grace could open that mouth, we had a way in. If she could not, we had a wall and the dead behind us. A blow hit the bay hatch hard enough to ring through the whole frame. Boone came on the intercom at once. He's gone. Open the lock, or I do it from here. I halted the water on the lower switchback and pulled the bay camera to the main screen. Mason Rudd stood in the cramped access space with his back bent under the low ceiling. The wound at his side had split open through the seal patch and packed itself with grey-black threads that moved against one another like nests of tiny wire. His neck wound had gone dark all around the collar. One eye tracked the camera, the other twitched under a wash of leaking blood. Captain, he said. His voice was still his own. Grace turned away from the screen and covered her mouth with both hands. Mason, I said. Step back from the hatch. I'm trying. He looked down at his left hand as if surprised to find it there. The fingers had fused together around 3 med injectors and a strip of splinters. Boone's pistol rose into frame from the side camera. Open the lock. One clean shot. Mason looked at Boone. Give me a minute. The grey threads in his side wound tightened. A tool from the deck, small hemostat or injector clamp I could not tell, lifted and snapped into the flesh near his ribs as if drawn by a magnet under the skin. Mason jerked and struck the hatch again, harder this time. I stood up from the cradle. Grace caught my arm. Nolan! I had not heard her use my first name before. The sound of it settled something instead of shaking it loose. He bought us time in the carrier, I said. Boone's voice came raw through the speaker. He's losing the fight. I went down the ladder with the sidearm drawn. Boone stood at the inner barrier, pistol aimed through the small inspection. The bay beyond had been slick with blood and med gel. Mason had sunk to one knee. The fused hand with the injectors kept opening and closing against the deck. His good eye found me through the port. Don't let it take the gate. I opened the inner barrel. Boone turned on me. Damn you! Mason came up in a convulsion driven by something past pain. He hit the barrier shoulder first with enough force to dent it. The side wound had opened wide and packed itself with metal from the deck. Bone showed under writhing grey filaments. His mouth stretched around words that would not form. I fired twice into the chest because I was too slow to trust a headshot in that cramped dart. It did not stop him. Boone fired once past my shoulder and took the left eye. Mason sagged against the barrier, still moving. I stepped in and put the muzzle against the center of his forehead. When he dropped, the injectors fused into his hand kept twitching for several seconds after the rest of him had gone quiet. Boone lowered the pistol. You see why I wanted it earlier. I looked at Mason on the deck, at the wall of the bay marked by his blood, at the medic's bag overturned in the corner, its contents spilled into red slicks and loose gauze. I see the whole bill, I said. The bay had to stay sealed after that. Boone helped me drag the body into the spent ammo locker, and I dogged the door shut with a wrench through the wheel because my hands had started to lose accuracy. Prickling numbness ran up from the old suit rip under my right sleeve. I ignored it while I still could. Back in the cockpit, Grace already had the freight panel line on local challenge. Her cut cheek had crusted dark. She sounded like she had spent 20 years talking horrors through bad weather and fuels. This is Senior Chief Grace Holloway, Civil Traffic Control, badge mark 714 Charlie, she said.
Buster.
I am requesting emergency ground entry at Freightmouth 12 under quarantine bypass authority. A machine voice answered from the mountain above us. Badge acknowledged. Authority expired by marshal transfer. Grace leaned toward the door. Marshal controller dead. I watched her bleed out in Cargo Tower 2. Freightmouth 12 remains under civil emergency code if any controller with direct line survives. Surviving controller confirmed. Quarantine override in effect. Submit bioscan for approaching personnel. Grace looked at me. Boone understood before she spoke. He gave one tight nod and unsealed his collar for the scanner node. Grace did the same. I held my wrist under the panel line. The suit patch at the forearm darkened under the foam. Thin grey lines ran up under the skin toward the elbow. Grace said nothing. The scanner beam passed over Boone, over Grace, over me. Contaminant load detected, the mountain voice said. Ground unit contains active necro-salvage markers. Full entry denied. Boone swore. Grace slammed a fist against the panel. Run compartment isolation, she snapped. We can split the bay. Contaminant profile on primary pilot compartment. Freightmouth 12 may open for uncontaminated personnel only. Ground unit must remain outside quarantine. Outside. The word sat in the cockpit like another body. For one ugly second, I saw my own kitchen in Redstone housing 15 years earlier. Boots by the door. Ore dust in the sink. The work roster clipped to the fridge. And the recall notice laid across it like a verdict. Come back in uniform. Come help take the world you used to work. I had obeyed because men always do when enough other men are already obeying. Now the mountain itself was telling me what I had become. The wall of dead had reached the lower switchback. I saw it through the rear camera as a rolling front of limbs and plates and ruined faces grinding at the road we had just climbed. Shells from buried weapons burst at random inside it. One blast tore a crater through the front rank, and the crater filled at once with more joined dead. Grace got hold of herself before Boone did. There's a power trunk on the freight face, she said fast. Manual coupling. The blast earlier must have knocked it loose. If we align it, the freight door will open enough for a man to pass. Maybe two at a squeeze. Then do it, Boone said. It's outside. I was already moving. The power trunk jutted from the rock beside the freight mouth like a broken spine. thick cables hanging free where a service vehicle or shell had ripped the connector block sideways. I brought the walker up nose first to the door and braced the hull against the concrete lip. The old freight mill sat recessed under a slab of rock and steel, 4 stories high, sealed by a segmented door thick enough to keep ore dust and weather out for a century. A narrow maintenance ledge ran beside the trunk. "Grace," I said over local, "get down there with Boone. I'll hold position." She caught my shoulder on her way past. Boone did not speak at all. He had the pistol in one hand and Mason's med bag slung over the other shoulder. Some men talk more when they accept death. Boone had gone the other way. They climbed down the access ladder into a pillar of loose rubble and crossed to the trunk while I turned the door and laughed sideways across the switchboard. The wall below kept rising. Individual infected had started to outrun the mass. A shape with both legs replaced by joined loading holes pulled itself upslope in savage lunges. Another wore part of a traffic drain across its chest, rotor blades still small enough to pick dust from the road. I opened with the right arm gun and cut the front ones down. The feed count dropped into the last 30 rounds. "Coupling's bent," Grace said over the car. "Boone, put your shoulder under that side. Higher, higher." The freight door gave a dull, internal thud. "Again," she said. The wall hit the lower leg of the walker in a rush of bodies and scream. Impact alarms flared. Joined arms clawed for handguards. A rifle trapped in the mass fired point blank into my shoulder until the barrel burst. I stamped down and crushed 3 bodies into the road. More climbed over them at once. "Door's moving," they said. "Nolan, keep that line off us." The last heavy shells were for collapsed charges rigged into the upper retaining wall. Old mine defense rooms tied into the past vertical planks. My panel still showed 3 fire events to feed the sun. I sent one into the shelf above the dead wall. Stone burst loose and buried the front rank in a red avalanche. The wall slowed for maybe 10 seconds. Then the dead inside the rock wall started climbing over their own, crushed. "Through," Boone said. "Grace, go." Together. "Move." I risked a glance left. The freight door had opened a gap no wider than a truck cab at the base. Grey light spilled from inside. Grace turned in the opening and looked up at me. Boone stood behind her with one hand on the inner rail. My right forearm had gone numb from elbow to glove. Grey filaments showed under the skin at the wrist when the panel light caught them. The suit patch had bought me time and nothing more. "Get inside," I said. Grace did not move. "You can still back off and run the outer shelf. There may be another..." "There isn't." The wall slammed the walker again, higher this time, bodies climbing onto the lower hull and shoulder. One of the bigger fused masses had reached the road, a tower of dead packed around the broken frame of a field gun, wheel rims turning through flesh as it came. It struck the walker's right side and dented the armor inward with a scream of tortured metal. The engine note dropped and came back rough. Boone shoved Grace toward the gap. She seized his sleeve and then let go. One beat later, she ran through the opening. Boone followed. He turned once, lifted 2 fingers in a fast, rough salute, and vanished into the port. "In a door in 30 seconds, Grace said over comm. Her breath came hard now from the climb inside. "Nolan, the retaining line charge is still answering your grid. If the cables survive, then you can bury the ascent, along with me." Silence on the line for one short span. Then Grace said, "You knew the road. You got it. You do what the road asks now." That came close enough to prayer that I almost laughed. I jammed the walker deeper into the freight mouth and locked the new joints. The machine protested in a chorus of strained and cracked mounts. The hull filled the lower half of the entrance. Anything coming through would have to climb over 300 tons of failing armor first. The wall of dead hit in full. Bodies poured over the lower hull and across the canopy glass. Faces smeared blood and dust over the armored viewports. Hands with shell rims for nails beat at the seams. Weapon parts trapped in the mass spat round sparks and fragments. The bigger fused gun with the field gun struck again and got one wheel assembly over the walker's right hip. I fired the last arm gun burst into its center and shredded enough tissue to drop the gun frame sideways. The dead around it absorbed the wreck and kept climbing. I fired the second heavy shell into the upper retaining wall. The shelf above the switchback blew open. Whole sections of road, rail, and old ore conveyor housing came down on the ascent. The collapse crushed the first ranks, buried the field gun mass to its axle, and filled the air with red dust thick enough to hide half the world. Through that dust, I still saw movement. Always more movement. Inner door sealed, Grace said. Her voice had changed. Concrete in the distance had reached us. We are in quarantine. Cargo stack secure. Good. I cut the line because any word after that would have broken something I still needed. The cockpit had grown hot and close. Warning lights painted the colours red and amber. Reactor heat gun. Coolant loss severe. Right leg actuator failure imminent. Life support in override with filters spent. My right hand had lost 2 fingers to numbness, though they still moved when I forced them. Outside, the dead covered the water from shin to shoulder. The machine shifted under their weight and mind, groaning against the freight face. One face stared at me through the cracked outer glass, female, young, half the scalp down, one eye replaced by a loader gun sunk straight into the socket. Her mouth worked around a strip of black tape. When she struck the canopy, the bolt in her eye sparked. The whole war had come down to this view. We had crossed worlds to take us home. The pause. The assault had broken. Men on both sides had died in wars of hate and fire. Then the dead had risen and made a third army to really care for the last human war that leaves behind. Flash, metal, signals, procedure, rescue systems, medical towers, guns built to answer movement. Every mission being turned inward and fed back into the war. I had helped build a little piece of this world long before it was great. That brought mattered. It kept the end from shrinking into pure sound. I knew the graves, knew the rock, knew where the old mine company had hidden charges in the retaining lines during the labor lines 20 years before the army. Knew how much force the switchback shelf could take before the whole ascent peeled away into the canyon. That knowledge had once more cleared. It would move the dead now. The last fireable shell sat in the rack in the left hand. The core overload keys waited under a cracked surface by my knee. I armed both. A blow split the outer glass on the right viewport. The crack crawled inward in a white branching row. Grey paste seeped through one edge. The infected woman with the bolt in her eye disappeared under a wash of bodies. A different shape rose in her place, broad and long, maybe 5 or 6 joined torsos wrapped around a water pilot with its harness strap still flowing. It heaved itself at the hull and stuck there, adding weight, adding pressure, adding one more seem useful thing made to hold a human body safe. I keyed external broadcast one final time. Highport Quarantine. This is Captain Nolan Hollister. Heavy Walker Corps. Freighter sent compromised. I am seeing. Keep your launches moving. Static answer. Then Grace came through anyway from somewhere inside the mountain. One launch remains on pad 4. Use it. We will. I sent the final heavy shell into the support stack of the French. Stone split. Steel beam shield. Old ore rails folded downward with a cloud of red dust and fragments. The upper face of the set started to come away. The dead on my hull thrashed and tightened their wrists as if some buried part of them understood what was coming. I took the reactor keys and turned them together. The core warning tone started low and rose. Heat climbed through the cockpit floor into my boots. Panels went dark one by one as power routed inward for a death no training sim had ever tried to sell as a load. It was work to the end. A job left, and I was in the one place that the job could be done. The walker settled deeper into the frame. Its joints locked under heat and lava. Stone rained down. The right viewport flew inward in a spray of armored glass. Dust and body matter burst across the cockpit. Grey filaments on my forearm tightened with sudden pain so sharp that white light flashed across my vision. I kept one hand on the controls anyway. Fool habit. Driver habit. Keep the machine lined up until the very end. A white spear of engine flame rose beyond the cargo towers, far above and left through the cracked canopy. Pad 3. One launch. It climbed through the dust and the dark, carrying whoever Grace could stuff inside and whatever future high port still deserved. The ascent came down. Rock hit the hull from above with the force of a planet remembering its own weight. Steel girders punched through the mass of dead and pinned them to the walker's back. Concrete slabs sealed the lower switchback. More stone followed, then more, until the world outside the cockpit shrank to a red, choking blur, and then to darkness broken only by the reactor glare building under my seat. I thought of ore convoys in winter light, chains on frozen road, coffee in a dented thermos warm between my palms, men waving from loader cabs at shift change. I thought of the first day I had taken a hall crawler through Redstone and felt its weight answer my hands. I thought of Mason asking for a minute, Boone hauling me upright in the cut, Grace turning at the door. I thought with a tired kind of gratitude that the road had finally asked me for everything, and I had enough left to give. The core reached its final tone. I put my palm on the main control brace as if I could steady the walker through the last second, the same way I had steadied it on bad roads all my life. Then I let the mountain take the rest. The junction box on Subdeck 47 had been throwing error codes for 6 days, which was 6 days longer than I could afford to pretend it belonged to somebody else. 300 meters below the last inhabited corridor, the procession stopped pretending to be young. Up on the residential decks, walls came in polymer panels with standardized fasteners and color-coded access ports. Down here, in the maintenance strata where I spent most of my shifts, every surface carried the work of generations who had kept the ship alive by refusing to let it fail in the same place twice. Conduit bolted over conduit, emergency patch over older emergency patch. My grandfather's welds over his father's. Beneath those layers, the walls turned to a dark mineral composite, no manual named with confidence, and no engineer I trusted claimed to understand. My name is Curtis Polk. I am a lower deck maintenance engineer on the Procession, a generational starship so old the official launch date exists in 3 different records, and 2 of them are treated as scripture. I fix what breaks. I trace faults. I keep lower corridors warm, lit, and pressurized, and in return the ship gives me a bunk, a ration card, and access to crawl spaces no one else wants. The junction box sat where 2 primary power conduits crossed on Subdeck 47. At the end of a maintenance corridor too narrow to walk. I had to belly crawl the last 15 meters with my diagnostic kit dragging at my heels. The error codes were ordinary enough. Voltage irregularities, impedance spikes, the kind of dirty signal you got from a corroding relay that had lasted 5 years past its rated lifespan because nobody wanted to shut down a corridor to replace it. 3-hour job. 4 if the bolts fought me. I had been mapping the ship's primary power grid for 5 weeks. Officially, it was an efficiency audit commissioned by the Lower Deck Supervisory Board, one of those annual exercises that generated fresh diagrams for old systems and a report nobody with authority ever read. I had done 3 of them in 12 years. They were methodical, dull, and only useful when they uncovered something somebody had hoped would stay buried. This one had. The ship's main power feed, the trunk line carrying generated energy from propulsion to habitation, recycling, gravity, climate, light, ran downward exactly as the manual said it should. I traced it junction by junction, relay by relay, through 36 subdecks of documented infrastructure. Then the line crossed the boundary of the lowest maintained level and entered the mortuary processing deck. According to every official schematic, the mortuary deck was a distribution line. Power flowed in, split across cold storage, sanctification shells, chapel systems, processing pumps. My instruments showed the opposite. Power flowed out. The net energy vector stayed reversed across every sample I took. Generation was happening down there, and the rest of the ship was taking what the mortuary deck produced. I replaced the relay in the junction box, resealed the housing, and opened the waveform archive I had been building in secret for 3 weeks. The pattern held. High amplitude, organically noisy, irregular in a way no reactor signature should ever be irregular. It looked like bioelectric discharge under extreme systemic stress. In my 20s, I spent 2 years on damage control. I had seen med telemetry from hull breach survivors and fire victims, from bodies going into shock faster than medicine could reach them. I knew what a nervous system in crisis looked like when it hit a monitor. This looked like thousands of them, overlapping and sustained, a century of agony compressed into signal. I packed my tools and backed out of the crawlway on my elbows. The lift ride toward populated decks took 8 minutes. I spent all 8 staring at the waveform on my lap. Sanctification. On the procession, the word was wrapped in so much reverence that doubting it felt childish and profane. When somebody died, the body was taken to the mortuary chapel. Family gathered. A deacon read the old texts. The dead were laid on the sanctification cradle and commended to the journey. Their strength, we were told, joined the procession. They walked beside those who had gone before. They lent themselves to the long crossing between stars. I had believed it once. At 16, I stood in the chapel with my little sister, clinging hard enough to bruise my hand, while Deacon Marr said my mother's strength would join the journey ahead of us. I remembered the dimmed lights, the hush, the way people touched our shoulders afterward as if grief had become a public sacrament. For 12 years after that, whenever the engines surged in the middle of the night, some part of me had imagined her there among the dead, keeping us moving. The lift passed the mortuary level. Through the narrow window I saw the Hale family in the corridor outside the chapel. Martin Hale, his brother Owen, and their father Gideon walking together with the rigid formality grief gives men ways not to fall apart in public. Martin's son Tommy had died 3 days earlier in a pressure seal accident on sub-deck 30. 22 years old, bright, quick with his hands. I had shown him how to read a flow diagram one slow afternoon, when he was still an apprentice and proud to be treated like he belonged in the maintenance shafts. His sanctification was scheduled for the next morning. Tomorrow Tommy Hale's body would be laid on the cradle. The neural hardware hidden inside the liturgical casing would engage. Whatever remained of his nervous system would be used to produce the signal I had been recording for weeks. I sat in the lift with my diagnostic kit on my knees and understood, with the certainty of a snapped fastener, that I had one night to decide what to do about it. I spent that night making copies. Every data set I had, every waveform, every grid map, every note on reversed energy flow went to a secondary chip. I hid the original archive behind a cable junction in the wall beside my bunk, then pulled the panel back into place and spent an hour lying awake with my eyes open, listening to the ship's low mechanical breathing through the pipes. By 0600, rumour had started to move. It had nothing to do with me at first. Lower deck rumours rarely do. They come up through the grates on their own, body not released from cold storage, clergy seen arguing in the processing plant, chapel staff working through the night, sanctification delayed, sanctification saved. By the time I reached the mortuary, 3 different versions were circulating outside the chapel grounds, and none of them were close enough to the truth to matter. The chapel was already full, 40, maybe 50 people, lower deck workers in clean shirts and work boots polished past usefulness, neighbours, 2 mid-deck cousins who looked lost among the maintenance folk. Deacon Wills stood at the front in 4 vestments, his face arranged into the grave serenity clergy practiced until it looked like a professional's art. I had seen him at funerals before. He was good at grief. He knew how much silence to leave after a family member started crying. He knew where to place his hands on the cradle to suggest blessing rather than procedure. Tommy lay wrapped in shipcloth with only his face exposed. 3 days dead, skin waxen, lips pale. The medical report had listed brain activity ceasing 4 minutes after decompression trauma. Neurologically dark. Martin sat in the front row, rigid enough to look braced for impact. Owen held Gideon upright by the elbow. The old man's mouth worked constantly, as if he were repeating a prayer too quiet for anyone else to hear. I took a place near the back where I could see the cradle's base. Beneath the decorative casing, I knew exactly where the interface sat. Wills began the liturgy. His voice carried beautifully in the cold chamber. Old words, old cadence, joining, strength, journey, the long corridor, the blessing of those who go ahead. The congregation murmured the responses. I heard my own mouth shape none of them. When Wills raised his hand over Tommy's forehead and spoke the committal phrase, the cradle emitted a soft tone. The congregation knew it as the sanctification chime. I knew it as an engagement signal. Tommy Hale's body convulsed. The first spasm lifted his shoulders off the cradle hard enough to clang the frame against its mounting brackets. At the same instant, the engines surged. Everyone in the room felt it. A deep shudder underfoot, the familiar thrust change of a ship adjusting itself in the dark. The room held still for 1 impossible second. Wills recovered first. The transition is sometimes accompanied by involuntary muscular... Tommy convulsed again. The deck answered again. This time nobody could miss the timer. Dead body, engine, dead body, engine. Martin was on his feet before Wills finished the sentence. The deacon put out a hand, all instinct and no authority. Please, Wills said, please remain seated. The sanctification process is sacred and delicate. Tommy's eyes opened. Silence cinched tight across the room. His pupils narrowed and widened in rhythm with the engine cycle. His jaw worked. His mouth opened as if trying to form a word with no one left inside to choose it. The tendons in his neck stood out. His fingers flexed against the cloth. Martin reached him in 3 strides and caught his son's hand. Tommy's fingers closed on his father's wrist. Tight, release, tight, release. Timed perfectly to the pulse running under the deck. Martin made a sound I had heard once before in my life, in a fire corridor after a child was pulled out too late. It tore out of him raw and wordless, the sound a body makes when reality has done something too large for speech. People surged backward. A woman near the 3rd row hit the wall hard enough to knock a memorial plaque loose. Gideon Hale sank into Owen's arms with his eyes fixed on Tommy's face. Declan Fossey, who had sanctified his wife in this room 6 years earlier, sat down where he stood as though someone clipped the tendons behind his knees. Wills lunged toward the cradle's manual override. I got there first and caught his wrist. Don't, I said. His face had gone grey. Up close, I could see the professionalism stripped off him like paint in a fire. Underneath it was horror. Beneath that lay something worse than horror. Recognition. This is a malfunction, he said. No. He tried to yank free. I held on. Martin was bent over the cradle, pleading with his son. Tommy's hand kept squeezing in time with the ship. Every pulse drew another surge from somewhere deep beneath us. The room had become an equation simple enough for anyone to read. It's not a malfunction, I said, loudly enough for the crowd. Watch him. Watch the deck. That's what sanctification does. The dead aren't joining the ship. The ship is using them. Wills stopped fighting. For one beat, I thought he was going to deny it. Then Tommy's body arched again. The floor rolled under us, and Wills's eyes broke. 90 seconds. I gave them 90 seconds because one glance would be denied, argued away, smothered in priestly language and official phrasing. 90 seconds was long enough for disbelief to rot into knowledge. Then I released Wills's arm. He hit the override with both hands. The cradle carried down. Tommy was there. The engine smoothed out so abruptly the room seemed to sag at the loss of him. Nobody moved. Martin stayed where he was with his son's hand clasped in both of his. Owen had to pull the wrench to get off Hussey's hands when the old man tried to stagger towards the door. Two younger workers near the back shoved the doors open and shouted into the corridor, but nobody was to come in.
I see a light.
Someone else started sobbing. Someone began praying louder than the liturgy had been saying. Will stood with one hand on the dead machine and stared at Tommy's face as if waiting for the boy to accuse him. I looked at the people in the chapel and understood the room had split open. 40-odd witnesses, 40-odd people who could never again pretend sanctification was metaphor. It would not stay in this room. By noon, the mortuary level was under restricted access. By evening, the lower decks were boiling. The first official notice came from the Office of Ship Governance, temporary suspension of public ceremonies due to equipment malfunction. The second came from the clergy, rare post-mortem neuromuscular discharge in recently deceased tissue, no suffering involved, no doctrinal implications. Neither survived first contact with witnesses. Families started showing up at cold storage demanding bodies back. Supervisors posted corridor watches outside the chapel. Deacons went deck to deck trying to calm people who no longer wanted calming. A pair of governance stewards interviewed half the attendees, and none of them left satisfied. On subdeck 32, somebody painted, "Let them stay dead" across an access hatch. On subdeck 29, someone else painted, "They carry us willingly beneath it." The second phrase got crossed out before shift change and rewritten twice as large by morning. Martin Hale did not go home. He sat outside the sealed chapel for 10 hours with Owen beside him and told every person who asked that they had watched his dead son used like a machine. That night, Reg Dunmore came to my bunk, closed the door behind him, and asked to see everything. Reg was structural maintenance. Hull, supports, load paths, old sections no one liked putting on reports because old sections generated old questions. He was my closest friend on the lower decks, which on the procession meant we had once dragged each other out of a coolant leak and had never since needed to explain why we trusted one another. He had a wife, 2 daughters on deck 29, and the habit of looking at any problem as if it might collapse on his children first. He watched the waveforms in silence. He watched my reversed flow maps. Then he leaned against the wall above the hidden data chip without knowing it was there and said, "If this is real, the ship tears open. It's real. I know." He rubbed his face. "I'm trying to work out whether that makes you brave or stupid. Those aren't opposite conditions. Not here they aren't." It was Reg who said we needed to know how deep it went before we let lower deck fury decide for us. If the mortuary chain was a corruption layered on top of a decent system, that was one problem. If it was the system, that was another. 2 days after Tommy's funeral, with the chapel still sealed to the public and the lower decks on the edge of open refusal, Reg opened a corroded pressure door below the last maintained subdeck and led me into the oldest part of the ship. 3 levels below the lowest serviced corridor, age stopped looking mechanical and started looking geological. The air was dry enough to sting. Dust lay in the corners in layered mineral drifts. The walls changed under our lamps. At first, the material only seemed wrong, too ridged, too warm-toned, too irregular beneath the corrosion. Then I put an ungloved hand against it and felt the grain. Reg saw my face change and touched it himself. Calcium. Mineral accretion over an organic substrate. The wall held the shape and density of bone. We went deeper. The hull revealed itself a piece at a time, as if the ship had been embarrassed to be recognized. Arches crossed the ceiling and resolved into ribs thick as structural beams. Vertically fused spinal columns ran in the keel direction. broad, flattened plates layered like shingles until the curve of scapulae emerged from the stone. Everywhere, trapped in the calcified matrix, translucent threads of ancient neural tissue had fossilized into glassy filament. My probe touched one exposed line and registered residual charge. The ship's original wiring was human nervous tissue, compressed, mineralized, integrated into the structure until bone and hull plating had become one composite system, carrying current after 1,000 years of strain. The founders had not installed life support into a ship. They had built the ship around their own bodies. Reg sat down hard on the deck, which under the dust showed the broad, crushed bowls of pelvic bone fused into flooring. He put both hands over his mouth. It was the first time I had seen him look frightened in 12 years. "This was designed," he said through his fingers. "This wasn't done to them later." I was already moving my lamp along the wall. There were cut marks in the calcified surface, etchings old enough that mineral growth had softened their edges but not erased them. Coordinates, ratios, mathematical structures repeated in sequence. One glyph appeared again and again along the keel spine, always aligned in the same direction. "It's a heading," I said. "They carved a heading into the hull." Reg stood and stared where my lamp pointed. Then they chose all of it. I wanted him to be wrong. I had spent the 2 days since Tommy's funeral constructing an easier enemy. Governance, clergy, the Ashworth line, some later corruption grafted onto a sacred rite until reverence turned into exploitation. The deep hull killed that argument for me in minutes. The founders had chosen this. They had written destination into their own bones and died into the structure with intention. Tommy Hale had not chosen. My mother had not chosen, no matter what the liturgy had implied. Neither had Declan Fossey's wife, or the hundreds of ordinary dead who had passed through sanctification as inherited duty. Founders' consent did not redeem any of that. It did change the shape of the crime. "The mutiny still happens," I said. Reg looked at me as if he had expected a better sentence. "When?" he asked. "Before or after you work out what happens when you cut power from 6,000 people?" "I'll work it out." "You'd better. Nera and the girls are on 29. If gravity fails on 29, they hit steel before they know why." That was Reg. His wife and daughters first, always. We climbed out arguing. He wanted estimates, reserve models, alternatives. I wanted proof in enough volume to make denial impossible. At the pressure door, he caught my sleeve and made me meet his eyes. "You get one promise from me," he said. "I help you find the shape of this. I do not help you kill the ship." I told him I understood. I did. I also knew understanding and obedience were not the same thing. The lower decks were already choosing sides. Some people wanted every sanctification cradle smashed. Some wanted the chapel reopened under armed guard. Some wanted the Lord himself dragged down to look Martin Hale in the face. Others insisted the right must remain, because whatever horror we had uncovered was the horror that kept the walls warm. That night I passed the chapel on my way to subdeck 34 and saw Deacon Wills standing in the corridor alone. He looked 20 years older than he had at Tommy's funeral. He recognized me, hesitated, then said, "You think I knew?" "Did you?" He looked at the sealed chapel doors. "Not like that." It was not an answer. It was more honest than denial. "What did you think sanctification was?" I asked. He closed his eyes. "Communion. Transfer. Something holy and beyond understanding." A tired, bitter breath escaped him. "Those phrases become habits if you say them for long enough. People trusted you." His face tightened, not in anger but in pain. "People trusted me because I stood beside them when they lost everything. I did that part honestly. That isn't enough." "No," he said. "It isn't." Then he walked away before I could decide whether I hated him more for what he had hidden or for the fact that he no longer looked capable of hiding it from himself. 8 days after Tommy's funeral, a lower deck delegation was granted audience on the bridge. I had spent 12 years below habitation, and nothing in 12 years of pipe runs and crawlways prepared me for the bridge. The chamber was cathedral scale, 40 meters long, maybe 20 wide, vaulted high enough to make sound travel strangely. Every visible surface was built from human remains translated into architecture. Walls of fused skulls and rib cages mortared with calcium. Pillars of vertebrae rising in pale columns. A floor of flattened bone polished by generations of boots. Overhead, femurs and tibia interlocked into arches like Gothic stonework stripped down to anatomy. At the center sat the neural throne. It did not look assembled. It looked grown from the same substrate as the bridge around it. A denser flowering of ancestral material shaped into a seat. Translucent nerve bundles rose from the armrests and headrest in branching tendrils. They entered the man seated there through permanent ports at the base of his skull, along his spine, and in the inner flesh of both forearms. Lionel Ashworth, 7th hereditary lord of the procession, was not the figure lower deck gossip had built for me. I had expected comfortable authority, indulgence, a body protected from work by title. The man on the throne was gaunt, mid-40s perhaps, though chronic strain had pushed him toward age. Scarring radiated from every port. Angry tissue, inflamed edges, skin that never healed because it was never left alone long enough to scar. His eyes were the most unsettling part. One focused on whoever addressed him. The other lagged by fractions, shifting at intervals to some inward feed no one else could see. Garrett Lund, his chief steward, stood at his right hand and translated Ashworth's quick responses into governance language. Our delegation petitioned for replacement parts, ventilation repairs, gravity plate maintenance, crew allotments for decks the upper levels like to forget existed. I spoke when spoken to. Graves from the supervisory board did most of the talking. I watched the tendrils. They moved, a tightening here, a pulse there, a slow contract and release against Ashworth's skin, like the breathing of something using his nerves as a balance. The throne was reading him. He was reading the dead. Midway through a tariff dispute between two mid-deck guild representatives, Ashworth seized. Every muscle in his body locked at once. His hands clamped the ulnar-shaped armrests hard enough to whiten the knuckles. The tendrils snapped taut. His head jerked back. Lund stepped toward him with a reflex that looked frightening. Then Ashworth's mouth opened, and a voice came out that was not his. It sounded older than his, rougher, with an accent that belonged to a century the procession no longer spoke in. The words landed with the cadence of somebody used to command before liturgy and bureaucracy had sanded command to sound. The voice accused the Ashworth line of betrayal. It named the third lord, Ashworth's ancestor, 8 generations back, and said he had deviated from the founder's heading to avoid a radiation belt. The deviation had preserved lives in the short term. It had also carried the ship off the trajectory carved into the deep hull. Every lord since had sustained the error, out of cowardice, convenience, ignorance, or fear of what the original route required. The dead remembered the heading. The dead had been correcting for the deviation in increments too small for ordinary governments to read. They had spent 3 centuries dragging the ship back toward where it was always meant to go. Court attendants rushed the throne. Lund grabbed for the spinal feed and failed. Ashworth's own arms faltered. 2 more people joined. The dead kept speaking through the Lord's throat while they physically tore the tendrils free. When the spinal cord came loose, blood ran down the back of Ashworth's collar and he collapsed sideways against the throne base. The bridge groaned. The calcified structure itself gave a deep, settling sound, like load-bearing bone releasing stress. The filamentary glow in the wall dimmed. I had not consciously noticed the bridge was lit from within until the light began to fade. Lund ordered the chamber cooled. No one argued. Not the guild delegates, not the lower deck supervisors, not the guards with their polished sidearms. We all stumbled out through corridors of bone, with the stunned silence of people who had watched government become possession in front of them. In the lift down, Graves kept opening his mouth and closing it. By the time I reached subdeck 34, I knew the mutiny could no longer be built around a simple story about a corrupt ruler. The dead themselves wanted something. The ruling family was part of the machine, not merely its beneficiary. That evening I called the meeting. We gathered in a maintenance bay between compressor housings and stacks of unused pipe collars. Reg came. Martin Hale came with Owen, and the same wrench he had nearly used on the chapel cradle. 9 more lower deck workers came. Cargo handlers, filtration techs, 2 electricians, a woman from cold storage whose brother had been sanctified last year. Their faces carried the hard, sleepless focus of people who had spent a week learning that grief had an electrical power. I told them everything I had so far. The power duct, the deep hull, the founder's bones, the heading carved into the keel, the voice on the throne. The room split faster than I expected. Martin wanted the bridge stormed and Ashworth dragged off the throne before another body was fed to the ship. Reg wanted the mortuary chain disabled only if we had hard numbers on reserves and a way to keep the lower decks from freezing. Tamsin Vale from cold storage said both of them were thinking too small. If the dead were fighting to restore the Founder's course, then perhaps the Ashworth line was the usurpation, and the ship should be handed back to the original design. A cargo foreman named Joran backed her immediately. Maybe the ancestors are right, he said. Maybe the horror is ours because we've been living off a plan we no longer deserve to understand. Martin crossed the room so quickly Owen had to catch his arm. My son is in that wiring, Martin said. You call that legitimate again. You say it while looking at me. Joran did look at him. To his credit, he did not look away. I am saying none of us built this, he said. We inherited it. If the Founders spent themselves to get us somewhere, maybe the crime is fighting them now. Easy to say when it isn't your boy twitching on the altar. Tamsin cut in before Martin could lunge. The question is consent. The Founders had it. Tommy Hale didn't. And if we cut the chain, Reg said, what then? Gravity dip on the residential decks. Climate failure. Pumps starving. I've got children sleeping under 20 tons of plating. I am not offering them to your conscience because all of you want a moral position before breakfast. The bay went loud. Argument layered over argument. Grief, terror, doctrine, engineering. I let it run until the shape of the divide became obvious. There were 3 factions. Destroy the system entirely. Reform it from inside and keep the ship alive. Restore the Founder's intention and stop pretending the living had authority to override the dead. They all looked to me in the end, which was unfair and inevitable. What did the Founders mean to reach? Reg asked over the noise. I took the data slate out of my pocket and looked at the repeated glyph I had copied from the deep hull. Same orientation every time. I don't know yet, I said. Martin swore at me. He was right to. Later, after the others had gone, Reg stayed behind with me among the compressor housings. He was rubbing at a crack in one knuckle where he had hit the table during the argument. You hear yourself? He asked. You sound like you're already halfway below us in your head. That's where people go when they decide an answer is too grand to wait for practical consequences. The practical consequences are murdering the newly dead. The practical consequences are also my daughters smashing their teeth out when gravity cuts on 29. He stepped closer. Curtis, listen to me. If we move with numbers. I told him I would try. He stared long enough to know I had not promised what he wanted. I went back to the deep hull alone. Reg had forbidden it in every way short of handcuffs. He was right that going without a structural partner was reckless. He was right that we needed reserve estimates more than revelation. He was right about nearly everything that mattered to keeping 6,000 people alive. 3 more days had passed since the bridge seizure. In those 3 days, 2 sanctifications had been conducted behind sealed doors despite the public suspension. The official line was equipment systems. The lower decks knew a lie when one was delivered in polished language. Anger had thickened into movement. Martin Hale was no longer the only man in his corridor carrying a cutting torch to bed. I modified my diagnostic interface using the cradle schematics I recalled during Tommy's funeral. The cradle was built to handshake with fresh neural tissue. My rig was built to force a conversation with the fossilized network in the deep pool. I dropped through the pressure door of O400 with my kit on my back, and the ship half asleep above me. The bone corridors were colder than before, or I was noticing more. I followed the keel spine to the deepest junction I had found with Reg, and knelt where 3 major filament bundles merged in the wall. My hands shook when I set the probe. I would like to say I hesitated because I was afraid. I did hesitate. The feeling was uglier than fear. It was hunger, need to know, sharpened until it felt like virtue. The probe made contact. The network accepted the connection. Pain hit first. It rose through me like something had seized the inside of my arm and yanked upward through marrow and tendon until my shoulder locked and my teeth cracked together. My display bloomed with data so dense it became texture rather than meaning. Waveforms collapsed into stacks, coordinates nested inside fields of ratios. Timing sequences stuttered across the screen faster than the processor could stabilize. I did not hear voices. I understood fragments. A calculation vast enough to use every integrated nervous system in the ship as distributed substrate. A navigation problem of insane complexity. The signal I had been reading from the mortuary chain was not random, suffering converted to power. It was structured distress, productive distress, pain used as processing state. Crisis changed the nervous system's operating capacity. That much came through clearly. A body in extremis generated resolution no calm brain could sustain. The founders had known it. The modern system had industrialized it. Each new dead body added computational depth to a problem the ship had been solving since launch. A term surfaced through the torrent, translated imperfectly by my software into something like prior frequency. It was less a destination than a source geometry, a pattern in deep space background radiation older than stellar formation, buried in the oldest observable light. The ship had been triangulating it for 1,000 years. The modern dead sharpened the solution. The ancient dead carried the foundation. The Ashworth line had interfered with course correction. The network had resisted. Another layer rose through the data. Direction flooded my body. My inner ear, my spine, the equilibrium systems that tell a person where the floor is and which way a falling object will go. Those systems took a new reference. The knowledge settled in bone. I tore the probe free. Blood spilled from my nose onto the deck. My left hand had gone numb to the wrist. I sat against a calcified rib and tried not to vomit. The ship around me felt slightly wrong, as if the old down had been replaced by something larger. When I finally stood, I knew which way the prior frequency lay without consulting any instrument. I climbed back toward maintained corridors with my pulse hammering at the base of my skull. Garrett Lund was waiting beside the maintenance lift on subdeck 38. He looked like a man who had been standing there long enough to decide patience was another form of authority. "The Lord Ashworth requests your presence," he said. "Immediately." He did not ask where I had been. He did not need to. The network had already told him. Lund walked me to the bridge without guards and with the polite conversational ease of someone escorting a colleague to an audit review. He asked whether the parts allocation approved at the last audience had reached lower storage. He mentioned a ventilation complaint on subdeck 26. He said all of it in the same tone that made upper deck administrators sound civilized while reducing your options to 1. The bridge was dimmer than on my first visit. Hairline fractures had spread through several load-bearing columns on the eastern wall. Fine cracks radiated from filament junctions in the calcified bone. The chamber had paid for the seizure. Perhaps Ashworth had as well. He sat the throne connected at every port. He looked worse, thinner than 8 days earlier. Skin around the spinal interface inflamed and crawling red toward his hairline. His left eye lagged visibly now, receiving something at a delay his body could not hide. The tendrils pulsed against his arms. Lund sealed the door behind me and withdrew. Ashworth watched me the way a feverish man watches an unwelcome physician. You've touched the deep substrate. I said nothing. They showed me the signature. He lifted one hand. The forearm tendrils moved with it, a nest of translucent lines sliding under irritated skin. They notice everything. You left a mark in the old network. They also showed me a map of the people you've spoken to since Tommy Hale's funeral. Then you know what happens next. I know what you think happens next. He leaned back against the throne and closed his eyes for a second, as if the effort of sitting upright had become negotiable. You think you are about to lead an uprising against a dynasty that feeds the dead into a machine. You are correct. You are also about to discover that ending one atrocity does not prevent the one behind it from continuing. His voice was drier than I remembered, less regal, more exhausted. There was no performance in him now. He told me what the throne did. 7 lords, each one consumed faster than the last. His father had lost his vision in stages until the dead's navigational feed replaced ordinary sight. His grandfather had finished his final year speaking in coordinates, ratios, fragments of course correction tangled into domestic sentences no one around him could interpret. The First Lord had lasted nearly 30 years after formal enthronement. Ashworth estimated he might last 2 more, perhaps less, before the network overwrote whatever remained of him that it still considered individual. When I sit here, he said, touching the throne arm with careful disgust, I feel the calculation pass through me. I do not get the answer. I get the label of it. Pressure, distress, their purpose. My body's distress improves through it. So did my father's. So did his father's. We were never sovereign. We were throttles. I watched him while he spoke. He did not look like a tyrant defending his station. He looked like a man in the late stages of being annexed. The mortuary chain made it worse, he said. More power, more resolution, more dead. It stabilized the ship and accelerated the calculation. It also made the lie harder to see because every generation inherited it as kindness. You could have ended it. You think I didn't try? His good eye fixed on me. At 27, I proposed mandatory consent declarations before sanctification. The clergy called it doctrinal vandalism. Governance called it destabilizing. My own father, who could still speak mostly as himself at that point, informed me the lower decks would riot if we told them what the engines were. He wasn't wrong. By then, the ship had 2 faiths built on the same machinery. The people who needed sanctification to be holy, and the people who needed it to be necessary. He told me about the prior frequency, and this time the explanation filled the holes my interface had burned into me, instead of repeating them. Before Exodus, before the generation ships, before the collapse that drove humanity off Earth, deep space signal analysis had found a non-random structure in the cosmic microwave background radiation. It was not a message in any language or a transmission aimed at listeners. It was a pattern embedded in the oldest light, older than galaxies, older than stars. The geometry of that pattern converged on a point in deep space. The founders of the procession believed the convergence marked a prior architecture, something like intelligence, or a structure intelligence might emerge from, woven into the universe before matter settled into its familiar laws. No machine they possessed could compute a route precise enough to locate it. Human neural tissue could, especially in crises. They chose agony as a tool, Ashworth said. They chose themselves first. Then they left the choice to inheritance, which is another way of refusing to leave it at all. He was silent for a moment. The tendrils of his forearms tightened and relaxed. I can still slow them, he said. Sometimes. I cannot stop them. I can slow them. That is what my line has been for 3 centuries. Delay, misalignment, human error on purpose. Enough resistance to keep the ship from arriving before the living have any say in what arrival means. I had not expected that. He saw it in my face. You wanted a cleaner villain. I wanted someone to blame who wasn't dead 1,000 years ago. You still have one. I let it continue. He said it without flinching.
No!
I let bodies go downstairs because keeping the ship alive with fewer dead required a political war I could not win from this chair while the dead used my own pain against me. There. Is that plain enough? It was. Then he laid out his offer. Publicly. End forced sanctification. Make mortuary processing voluntary. Bring engineering onto the bridge through a formal consulship. Let me help him reconfigure generation, reduce dependency, and hold the ship together long enough to negotiate with the dead rather than lose it to them. Privately, beneath all that language. Help me. Sit beside me. Share the weight. Become another mind inside the fight. You interfaced with the substrate and lived, he said. That matters. The network notices you. It will notice you more if you oppose it. If you work with me, we may yet keep the ship human. I studied the man on the throne and saw the weakness under the offer. The lower decks are already moving, I said. You know them. Yes. You can't stop them. He did not answer. You can't stop the dead either. They've been overriding navigation for weeks. The lower decks feel it every time the engines surge. They're accelerating. You're losing control of both sides. You want me because I understand the grid well enough to manage the damage when they collide. Ashworth's left eye tracked to me. His right was fixed elsewhere, reading whatever layer of invisible pressure the throne felt. And what do you think happened? He asked quietly. When there is no lord left to restrain them at all. I had no good answer. That was the last useful thing he gave me. I spent the night in the lower maintenance archives with Reg and Martin, and a reserve member that refused to become merciful no matter how often we were around. If we destroyed the mortuary chain, we would cut roughly 40% of recent generation capacity off the grid. The exact share varied by season, by population stress, by how much supplementary draw the modern dead were handling for the old network's calculations. The founding substrate was deeper, more integrated, less efficient, still active. It had carried the ship for generations before the mortuary chain scaled up into system-wide dependence. It might carry us again. Might. The words sat in the room like a chemical smell. Martin did not care about probabilities. He had cared for 10 days. 10 days was all the restraint grief had left him. Reg cared about nothing else. If we do this, he said, tapping the reserve tube, we hit emergency amber inside limits. Climate lag 6 to 8 hours. Gravity fluctuation immediate. Water recovery starts dropping unless we can reroute storage manually. On 29, nursery heat goes first if somebody in Central tries to protect the upper decks. We keep them from protecting the upper decks, Martin said. With what? Righteousness? With wrenches if we have to. Reg rounded on him. My children are not a slogan, Martin. Martin stood. For 1 second I thought they were going to come to blows. Then Martin sat back down and covered his face with both hands. I'm sorry, he said into his palms. I'm sorry, I just can't... He broke off.
Go forward.
When he looked up again, his eyes were red, furious and tired enough to make age visible in him. Tommy used to leave his boots in the corridor, he said. Every day. I told him every day to move them before somebody broke a neck. Last week, I nearly tripped over them and started shouting for him before I remembered. That's what I get now. Boots in a corridor and the sound he made on that table. So don't ask me to be patient while they feed somebody else's son to the ship. Nobody spoke for a while after that. Reg rubbed the back of his neck. I'm not asking for patience. I'm asking for an order of operations that doesn't murder 6,000 people trying to save the dead. I looked at the charts until the numbers blurred, then at the schematic of the mortuary processing level, then at the memory of Ashworth in the throne, asking what happened when the dead had no restraints. We cut the chain, I said. Reg shut his eyes. We cut only the mortuary chain, I went on. Not the deep substrate, not the throne, not the bridge. The founders chose their path. The modern dead didn't. We sever the interfaces and the transfer relays, leave the ancient network intact, and see whether the ship can stand on what it was before it started feeding on the newly dead. That isn't a plan, Reg said. That's an amputation.
No!
Yes. He looked at me for a long time, then at the reserve model. If Central locks down and traps us below, we work fast. If the first relay cut triggers automatic compartment seal, you get us through. He let out a breath that sounded like surrender and disgust mixed together. I hate that my skill set keeps making your decisions possible. Martin picked up the wrench. When? 0200, I said. Before day shift. Before the next sealed ceremony. No one asked what came after. Maybe because no one believed in after anymore. Only next. We went with 11 people through service corridors the public never saw. Reg led us past a coolant exchange line and through a maintenance shaft that opened behind the mortuary processing deck's west wall. Martin was directly behind me, carrying the wrench in one hand and a cutting torch in the other. Owen came with him. Tamsin Vale came from cold storage because she knew the deck layout better than any of us. 2 electricians brought bypass cutters and insulated gloves. The rest carried whatever lower deck people always carried when institutions failed them. Tools heavy enough to become arguments. The processing level was larger than the chapel above it, and honest in the way factories are honest. Tile, drain channels, bundled conduit. Heavy equipment mounted to the deck on vibration dampers. 14 sanctification cradles in 2 rows, stripped of liturgical casing.
I've got the
Bare
tunnel.
spinal taps, interface arms, transfer couplings feeding the main bus. Upstairs, grief was wrapped in cloth and squatted. Down here it was industrial design. One cradle was occupied, not active, prepared. A body lay under a thermal cover with the face turned away from us. Beside it stood Deacon Wills in shirt sleeves with 2 acolytes and a governance technician. He had one hand braced on the cradle frame and looked up as our lights hit him. For a second, no one moved. The room recognized itself. Martin's breath changed. That was all the warning I had before he touched the floor. I caught him around the chest. Owen got his own. The wrench swung once through empty air and hit a support post hard enough to ring. Wills did not retreat. His face had gone bloodless. He stood his ground. "You're too late," he said, and his voice shook on the word late as if he despised himself for choosing it. "For what?" Martin said. "To save another body from you?" Wills looked at the covered shape. The family signed consent. "After what you told them?" Tamsin said. "After what exactly?" The governance technician reached for a wall. Reg hit him with the shoulder and drove him sideways into a panel before he could slap it. One of the acolytes cried out. The other ran to the east door. Owen went after the acolyte. I never saw whether he caught him because the whole room lurched as Martin brought the wrench down on the nearest interface arm and shattered it at the joint. The alarm tripped anyway. Red shutters started descending over the outer exits. Emergency klaxons hit at once. Reg swore, left the technician groaning on the deck, and sprinted for a maintenance cabinet built into the west wall. 3 minutes before the fire doors sealed fully, he called. That woke everyone. The deck became one. Martin and Owen on the first cradle. Tamsin and 1 electrician in the occupied unit, ripping the transfer leads loose before anyone could think to ask whether that was gentle in letting the process start. The second electrician moved with me toward the bus junctions along the south wall. Behind us, Will stood in the middle of the room like a man trying to decide whether his life had any remaining shape if he failed both God and governance in the same hour. Help or move, I told him. He stared at the exposed machinery, at the body in the cradle, at Martin Hale dismantling the apparatus with a violence too precise to be known. Then Wills pulled off his deacon's collar, tossed it aside, and went to the nearest power transfer manifold with both hands. He knew where to strike. That surprised me more than anything else in the room. The first relay cut sent a hard shock through the floor. Lights dipped into amber. Somewhere above us, a warning tone started cycling through the ventilation system. The second relay dimmed half the dark. Reg had the maintenance cabinet open to the service door and was bypassing the descending shutters manually, fingers moving fast on the corroded contacts. Curtis, he said, if central senses the cascade full, it'll hard isolate the whole level. I'm aware. Be more useful now.
Use this orb of energy.
We
to your
moved
advantage.
faster, coupling 3, 4, 5.
Return to your
Each
bodies at
severed
once.
line dropped current
Stand
on my
in for the
handheld
Reapers.
display.
Buy us
Transfer
time.
load fell in
You
stair
must
steps.
never escape.
The ship answered with every loss. Gravity fluttered once hard enough to make my stomach lurch. Somewhere in the corridor beyond the shutters, boots hammered toward us. Security or clergy or both. One of the cargo handlers froze midway through a swing. My brother was on one of these, she said, staring at the row of stripped cradles. Tamsin grabbed her face in both hands.
Hold nothing back
Then
now.
break it harder.
The fate of Tyria
The
hangs in
woman
the
did.
balance.
Wills took a pry to the occupied cradle's spinal cord. Martin cut through the central interface spine with the torch. The body under the thermal cover did not move. For that mercy alone I was grateful beyond language. At Relay 8, the emergency lights nearly failed. The room went dark for a beat, then recovered in throbbing amber. Reg slammed a cabinet panel shut with his forearm and said,
What happens now?
West shutters
There's
held,
no one left to
east
rule
is
the
gone.
underworld.
The acolyte
Isn't
Owen had chased did not
Now
come back.
leave.
That meant security would. Finish the bus, Reg said. I hit relay 9, 10, 11. At 12, the current on my display collapsed to 0. The mortuary chain went dark. The ship lurched so violently, Martin had to catch himself on the ruined cradle. All the deck lights died. For 2 seconds, we had nothing but the blue-white ghosts of instrument screens and the red bars on my diagnostic unit. Then, from somewhere deep below our feet, another system answered. Cold light spread through the walls. It came from the fossilized filaments threaded through the structure itself. The ancient substrate surged awake to compensate. The processing deck, the corridor outside, the very bones of the ship began to glow from within. Emergency amber returned, weaker than before but steady. Gravity stabilized. The ship had lost a limb and was still standing. Martin sank onto the deck beside the destroyed cradle and started crying with the exhausted private grief of a man whose rage had finally found something to hit. Wills leaned both hands on a dead manifold and bowed his head. Reg checked my display, did the fastest calculations of his life in silence, then said, "We're alive. For now." The boots in the corridor had stopped. That frightened me. No one was trying to break in because something larger had taken priority. I knew what it was before the first harmonic reached us through the floor. The hull was singing. We followed the sound upward. Not music exactly. A structural resonance just above hearing, rising through the ship's bones. Every exposed neural filament in the walls glowed with the same blue-white interior fire. The maintenance corridors had turned cathedral. The ship was drawing on reserves it had hidden from us for 1,000 years, or burning through ones it had never expected to spend all at once. By the time we reached the bridge level, people were pouring into the corridors from every direction. Governance stewards, lower deck workers, 2 medics, a group of clergy in half-buttoned coats, Lund moving fast through all of them with the fixed face of a man who had run out of prepared responses. The bridge doors stood open. Lionel Ashworth was flying the ship. He sat the neural throne with every port engaged, his head thrown back, his hands moving over controls I had not seen during petition sessions. Manual overrides built into the throne itself, levers and calcium switches grown from the bone arms. His fingers moved too fast. Input cascades flashed across the archaic displays built into the walls. His eyes showed only white. The dead had him completely. The mortuary chain's destruction had silenced the modern dead and concentrated the old network through the one remaining high-bandwidth connection on the ship. Ashworth had become a terminal. Every skull in the bridge walls glowed, every vertebral pillar, every fused cage of ribs. The chamber was bright enough to hurt. Lund stopped beside me and whispered, "What have you done?" I almost answered him. Then the ship decelerated, hard. The force hit like impact. Everyone still standing slammed forward. I went to one knee against the bone floor and felt the air forced out of my lungs. Somewhere behind me, glass shattered. Someone cried out. The deceleration held, brutal and sustained, long enough for my vision to constrict. Then it stopped. The procession, which had been in motion since before anyone alive had been born, was still. People got up slowly, stunned and disoriented in the silence. The bridge displays reconfigured themselves in the walls, ancient sensor fields trying to describe what the ship had reached. Conventional instruments read emptiness. No star, no world, no rubble field, no known source. My body knew better. The directional pull left behind by the deep hull interface vanished in the instant of arrival. It did not weaken. It disappeared because there was no farther direction to point. In its place came saturation, uniform, omnidirectional presence pressing through my spine and inner ear, and the scar of pain the interface had left in my nerves. We were inside the signal. My handheld agreed. Every sensor that could register the prior frequency was buried in it. The reading came from everywhere at once, surrounding us, under us, through us. A mathematical structure older than ordinary matter, present at a point space looked at and called empty only because matter-based instruments lacked a category for what they had found. The ship's bones resonated with it like a struck tuning fork. Ashworth collapsed. The tendrils withdrew from his body with a wet, mechanical finality. His head sagged. His arms fell loose. He slid from the throne and hit the floor on his side. He was breathing. His eyes were open. They tracked nothing. Roland dropped to his knees beside him and touched 2 fingers to the Lord's throat. After a second, he looked up at me, facing the man whose higher rank just wasn't better. Alive. And even he sounded unsure whether it mattered. The glow in the bridge walls died upon the ribs. Every skin, every rib, every fin. Dark. The harmonic in the hull faded into silence so artificial that it felt occupied. The dead had gone from the system, or finished, or had spent whatever remained of themselves in the final calculation. The throne sat inert in the middle of the chamber. The bridge, stripped of its inner light, became only a room made of bone. People kept entering, lower deck workers. The rest had been sabotage team. Security who had forgotten to arrest them. Clergy who no longer knew what office they were. Martin Hale came through the doors with soot on his sleeves and stopped when he saw Ashworth's body on the floor. He walked to the throne first. He looked at the corpse, the withdrawn tendrils, the empty white face of the last lord. Then he turned to me.
No change in the storm.
What did you do?
If someone's responsible, it wasn't
His
that
voice
thing.
was quiet enough to make
Head
the
on
whole
back.
bridge listen.
I'll send more scouts later.
I broke the mortuary chain, I said. No new dead will be processed. And the rest of it? I looked at the dark walls. The Founders reached what they were aiming for. Whatever powered the old network, they spent it getting us here.
Tell me you saw them.
Here where? I checked my display again, even though it would not become kinder. The prior frequency saturated every reading. The external viewports showed nothing but featureless dark. We're at the source, I said. Reg came to my side and read over my shoulder. I felt him reaching the same numbers I had. Finite reserve, no generation, minimal propulsion. A ship designed to move forever now stopped in a place ordinary instruments could barely describe. Can we use it? He asked. The signal. I don't know. Can we study it? Maybe. Can it kill us? I looked at the screen, then at the quiet throne. Probably. Martin laughed once, sharp with disbelief. Good. Nice to know the future's still ours. Behind him, the crowd thickened around the bridge entrance. Faces turned to me because I was the one who had broken the visible machine. Faces turned to Lund because he was still wearing governance insignia. Faces turned to the dark throne because habit is difficult to kill. One of the lower deck workers spoke first. Do we need another look? The question moved through the chamber like a small cold wind. Lund looked at Ashworth. Wills, who had come up from processing with dust on his sleeves and no collar at his throat, looked at the throne and then at me. Reg looked sick. Martin's hand tightened on the wrench. I understood in that second how quickly institutions regrow around vacant machinery. No, I said. No one moved. I stepped onto the raised floor around the throne because people needed to see who was speaking, and because I was tired of pretending decisions happened somewhere else.
That looks valuable.
We're done with lords, I said louder. We're done with this throne. We're done feeding bodies to the ship. No clergy decree, governance order, panic, or cold season gets to bring it back. The dead once chose something terrible. We inherited the habit. We ended it. Martin came up beside me, looked once at Ashworth's vacant body, then swung the wrench into the nearest interface stand. It cracked. The sound rang through the dead bridge like a verdict. Nobody stopped.
My undead minion.
Reg joined us a second later with a maintenance bar from the wall cabinet. He hesitated only once. One glance at me, one glance at the remaining tendrils, then drove the bar down through the spinal mount of the throne's main feed. Calcium shattered, translucent filaments splintered. Old technology died like brittle bone because it had become brittle bone. Lund flinched at the first blow. By the third, he was helping clear the fragments. That was the living choice the dead had not made for us. When the throne was no longer capable of seating anyone, I climbed down and started going orders because the alternative was silence. Open every upper deck store ledger, I told you. No restricted inventory. If we're rationing, we ration from one ship, not two. He nodded. It took him a second, as if he had never before been addressed in command mode by someone for Then he nodded again, harder. Reg, get me reserve notes. Climate priority routing, gravity balance. Every battery stack and thermal sink still functioning. Are you ready to work? Yes. He looked at me as though he still expected judgment before his words. You know every family with a body currently in cold storage. You go to them yourself. You tell them the truth before anybody else gives them doctrine to hide inside. His face pinched, but he said, "Yes." Martin was still breathing rash from the destruction of the throne. I put a hand on his shoulder. I need lower deck crews in assembly bays within the hour. People who can strip non-essential systems without causing cascade failure. He stared at me for one beat, then nodded. I'll get them. The bridge became a work site, not orderly. Too frightened for that. Too human. People moved because movement beat staring into the dark. Medics took Ashworth away on a stretcher while Lund signed whatever made governance function until governance could be rebuilt into something that deserved the word. Reg commandeered a wall display and started rerouting load priorities with 2 electricians from the sabotage team. Wills left without vestments and without the steady walk clergy used when they wanted to look chosen. I stood at the viewport once the first wave of orders was moving and let myself look outward. Nothing. Then more than nothing. The eye saw void. The instruments saw pattern. My body felt pressure without weight, resonance without sound, the vast presence of the prior frequency pressing against the hull and passing through it. It offered neither threat nor comfort. It was simply there, a structure older than stars waiting at the end of a route purchased with 1,000 years of human pain. The reserves would last weeks, perhaps a month if Reg was right, and if upper deck stores were larger than governance records admitted. After that, we would have to do what the founders had never planned for, build a future that did not require suffering to run. Martin came to stand beside me after a while. His grief had not eased. It never would. It had changed posture. Tommy's gone, he said. I did not lie to him. Yes. It's the Navigators. Good. We stood in silence. After a minute, he asked, "Do you think they found what they wanted?" The founders, he meant. The dead. All those bodies turned to architecture and code and purpose. I looked at the darkness outside, at the signals saturating every instrument I had, at the bridge around us now reduced from holy machinery to a room full of workers and frightened officials and people learning that inheritance could be refused. I think they found something, I said. Whether it was worth what they spent to get here isn't their question anymore. He considered it. He Whose is it? Ours. That was all. He sat down on the bone floor by the viewport and set the wrench across his knees like a tool instead of a weapon. After a little while, Reg joined us with data collecting equipment, Reese across his foot. Luna came later, still in full clothes, carrying 3 open store manifests and looking like a man who had aged into honesty in a single afternoon. Others followed. Lower deck members, a pair of necklaces, transit from cold storage, a key. Eventually Wills, after he had done the hardest walk on the ship and come back to the face of a man who would never again mistake literature and innocence.
I appreciate that.
One by one they settled among the inert bones. Nobody prayed. Nobody asked the dead for instruction. We looked out at the void, and the impossible signal hidden. The prior frequency remained steady, enormous. It made no demand. It offered no blessing. We did not care whether we called it source, architecture, intelligence, relic, physics, or art. It had been waiting since before waiting had anything along its line. I sat on the floor, my palm against the floor. The surface answered with silence. There was no glow, no colour, no computation, only mineral, calcium, and the petrified labour of people fierce enough to turn themselves into a vessel for a future we could never see. The ship around us was fine. Air, heat, water, food, salvage. All the practical brutalities Reg had been right about from the beginning. We would spend the coming days pulling apart the systems built to feed on the dead and turning whatever could still be used toward keeping the living alive. We would ration. We would fight. We would probably fail in several ways at once before we learned how to do anything else. Still, the throne was broken. The chain was broken. For the first time in the procession's history, 6,000 living people were stranded together in a silence no longer maintained by ancestors, clergy, or hereditary pain. Outside the hull, the oldest signal in the universe waited. Inside it, in a ship built from human suffering and finally denied more of it, we began.
This one's kind of cute.